Welcome, Sleepy Summoner. Today I will tell you the complete story of San Uzal, better known as Mordekaiser. Prologue. The empty wasteland. The wasteland had no horizon. An endless expanse of grey sands stretched in all directions, blanketed by a haze that dulled the senses and swallowed sound. For the first time in a life measured by conquest and blood, San Uzal stood alone, not upon a field of battle surrounded by the dying cries of his enemies, but upon a desolate plain where even memories faded. There was no hall of bones, no resplendent feast laid by the gods of his people, no triumphant ancestors waiting to welcome him into their company. There was only nothingness. The realization came slowly, like a whisper from lips he could not see. He ran calloused fingers through grit that shifted like coarse ash underfoot. He inhaled, expecting the copper tang of blood, but the air held no scent at all. "I am dead," he thought. The words drifted across his mind, light as dust. As the truth settled, a low chuckle bubbled up from his gut and spilled from his chest in a ragged laugh. In life he had embraced death as a companion. He had sent countless souls ahead of him toward the promised hall, and his faith had been unwavering that he, too, would be rewarded for his devotion and might. Instead of golden halls, he was met with grey desolation. Fleeting sadness flickered and was consumed by a familiar fire. He had confronted despair many times as a mortal and overcome it through sheer will. If there was to be no afterlife for him, then the emptiness itself would become his to conquer. The certainty in that thought anchored him where everything else faded. He took a step, then another. Fine sand hissed around his bare feet. Distant voices rustled at the edge of hearing, a discordant chorus too faint to make out. San Uzal walked on, determined to find the truth in this barren place. Time lost meaning. Moments bled into days, days into years, though no sun rose or set above the featureless plain. Confusion solidified into disbelief. Disbelief became anger. Anger grew into fury. The voices never ceased, whispering madness that gnawed at the back of his mind. Had his priests lied? Had his ancestors abandoned him? Had the gods he'd slaughtered for being nothing but falsehood? These questions burned for a while and then were consumed by a simpler, pressing truth. There was nothing here, a vast emptiness devoid of reward, a void without promise. Yet San Uzal refused to fade. Where lesser spirits frayed like old rope and drifted into oblivion, his essence clung together around the furnace of his wrath. He was San Uzal, conqueror of the wildlands, master of the tribes. He had built an empire where there was none. In life, he had overcome all odds and turned despair into triumph. Death would be no different. If the realms beyond did not hold the kingdoms he was promised, he would forge them himself. Somewhere in the endless fog, there would be power, and he would bend it to his will. Resolute, he pressed onward into the unknown, vowing to conquer death as he had conquered life. Chapter 1. The Birth of San Uzal. Long before his name was whispered with dread or awe, before he donned iron and blackened souls with necromantic sorcery, San Uzal was a child born beneath a blood-red moon. His tribe, hardened by winters that killed the weak and summers that scorched the land, marked his birth with omens. The shamaness pressed charcoal across his brow and declared that the ancestors had sent a warrior, a son who would bring glory. Even as an infant, he seemed too aware, eyes studying the flickering torchlight, fists clenched in quiet determination. When he took his first steps, he did not stumble. When he spoke his first words, they were commands to dogs who obeyed. The elders whispered that an old soul burned in him. The northern wildlands were unforgiving, a patchwork of rival clans and tribes that raided and bled each other for scarce resources. Strength and cunning were the only currencies that mattered. San Uzal's tribe eked out a living along the edges of wind-carved canyons, trading furs and bone charms to those who dared approach. As a boy, he learned to stalk prey across frozen slopes, to track by the barest imprint left in snow. He sparred with warriors twice his age, learning quickly that ferocity could compensate for size. When other children listened wide-eyed to tales of the gods, he studied the war council, memorizing the way chieftains plotted ambushes and negotiated alliances. His rise was meteoric. In his 16th year, he challenged a veteran champion who coveted his sister. They fought at dawn, blades flashing under a sky streaked with crimson. San Uzal anticipated each heavy strike, dancing just out of reach until the moment came to slip inside the champion's guard and drive his spear through the man's heart. Blood steamed in the cold air. He stood over the fallen champion and claimed leadership by right of conquest. None dared dispute him. Under his rule, the tribe became an army. He organized them into war bands and appointed captains based on merit rather than birth. Those who resisted were given the choice to kneel or die. Most chose kneeling. He raided neighboring settlements, taking what they needed and burning the rest. Mercy was weakness. Fear was a tool to control the hearts of men. When he had consolidated the nearby clans, he turned his gaze to more distant horizons. Stories of fertile valleys and rich cities to the south tempted lesser chieftains, but San Uzal saw opportunity beyond plunder. He dreamed of forging something enduring, an empire carved in blood and iron, bound by dark faith. He sought counsel from shamans who whispered of gods that demanded sacrifice, gods older than the tribes, whose halls were said to overflow with warriors. They told him of the Hall of Bones, a place where the greatest conquerors feasted for eternity. San Uzal listened to every myth and legend and concluded that power came not from supplication, but from taking. If the gods existed, they were to be challenged and, if possible, replaced. He set out on his first true conquest when the snows thawed and rivers swelled with ice melt. Hundreds of warriors followed him, clad in furs, carrying crude iron weapons and shields made from tanned hides. They moved as one. Their first target was a fortified settlement perched on a ridge above a river. The defenders rained arrows and hurled rocks, but San Uzal ordered his men to drag felled trees and build a ramp. Under cover of night and driving rain, they ascended the ridge, screaming battle cries that drowned out the storm. He was the first to breach the gates, smashing them apart with a stolen battering ram, his axe cleaving through armor and bone alike. By dawn, the river ran red. Survivors were offered a choice: join him or be nailed to posts as a warning to others. Many chose to join. Success bred loyalty. The more victories he claimed, the more tribes flocked to his banner. He rewarded bravery with positions of command and punished cowardice with exile. Slowly, the disparate peoples of the wildlands began to think of themselves not as separate clans, but as a single force under one iron will. San Uzal ensured their loyalty by providing food, spoils, and a sense of belonging. He invoked the old gods, not out of reverence, but as a means to rally his followers. Around bonfires, after battles, he would speak of the Hall of Bones, of eternal glory awaiting those who died in his service. He did not believe he would find peace there, but he used the myth to harden their resolve. His empire grew outward like a storm, a dark tide that swallowed all in its path. Hill forts fell, great beasts were hunted and offered as sacrifices. He built altars from skulls and weapons, staining them with the blood of captives. He appointed priests to maintain rituals and enforce the faith that served his ambitions. Through fear and charisma, he established law where there had been only custom. The northern wildlands, once a fractured tapestry of tribes, began to march under a single banner emblazoned with his sigil, an upturned blade encircled by jaws. Chapter 2. Conquest and Rise to Power. Years blurred into relentless campaigning. San Uzal's forces hammered against ever more distant peoples, absorbing them or annihilating them. No river was too wide, no mountain pass too treacherous. He recruited smiths from conquered villages to forge better weapons and armor. Under his order, scavenged metal was melted and reforged into axes and swords that gleamed darkly. He dictated that each warrior's armor carry markings of his deeds, notched plates, carved runes, and straps taken from fallen foes. Individual glory fed into collective pride. The conqueror was everywhere in the roaring battle lines, in the crackling fires of night, in the whispered prayers of mothers who feared and revered him in equal measure. In the Didem valleys between jagged peaks, he confronted the largest confederation of tribes ever assembled. These tribes had united in desperation, bolstered by a prophecy that a warlord clad in antlers would lead them to freedom. San Uzal crushed their prophecy. He challenged their antlered champion in single combat, circling in mud up to his calves while thousands watched. The champion was strong and fast. Each sweep of his axe aimed to take San Uzal's head. But strength without strategy was nothing. San Uzal baited, feinted, and when his opponent overreached, he stepped inside the blow, drove a spear into the champion's side, and ripped free with such force that ribs cracked audibly. The crowd fell silent. He raised the antlered helm on his spear and claimed the confederation with one brutal gesture. Those who resisted were forced to watch their sacred totems burn. His ambition swelled with each victory. He established a capital, if the word applied atop a plateau overlooking the confluence of two rivers. There he ordered the construction of the Hall of Bones, not as an altar, but as a symbol of his will. It was a massive hall, built from oak beams blackened by fire and adorned with trophies from every tribe he had conquered. Skulls lined the walls in patterns, interspersed with blades that had tasted blood. At its center stood a great table carved with scenes of conquest. Here he held court, surrounded by warlords who owed him their allegiance. He used the hall to cement alliances, to plan campaigns, and to remind all who entered that his power was absolute. Not all followed willingly. Rebellions flared like brush fires. One chieftain attempted to poison him with a goblet of fermented mare's milk. San Uzal noticed the bitter smell and forced the chieftain to drink instead. The man writhed and died, foaming at the mouth. His kin were cut down. Another tribe ambushed a supply convoy. In response, San Uzal rode to their village and razed it to the ground, sowing salt into the earth so nothing would grow. Mercy was not in his lexicon. To those who betrayed, he offered only suffering. Fear kept order as much as loyalty did. As his dominion expanded, so too did his understanding of faith and fear. He realized that belief could be wielded like a weapon. He encouraged stories painting him as more than mortal, a champion chosen by gods, a warlord destined to rule forever. He presented offerings to strange idols and performed rituals more for the spectacle than any true reverence. The shamaness who had declared his birth a portent served him still, now old and hunched, her eyes milky. He would consult her at times, less for her visions than to remind his people that even the spiritual answered to him. He demanded sacrifices be made in his name to gods who, perhaps, never existed. The air in the Hall of Bones grew heavy with the iron tang of blood and the acrid smoke of burning herbs. His thirst for conquest was driven by more than greed. He was haunted by a singular idea that his deeds in life must earn him a place at the table of gods. Victory alone might not be enough. He began to crave immortality, not as a legend told in fireside tales, but as a literal continuation of his will. The shamaness told him of rituals and offerings, but he dismissed them as superstition. Instead, he sought out darker whispers. In travels to ruined temples half buried in snow, he discovered carvings that spoke of realms beyond the mortal, of places where spirits could be bound. He demanded knowledge from captive mystics who had studied stars and bones. Most knew nothing, and those who did quickly realized that withholding secrets from him meant death. One winter night, as snow fell thick and silent, he sat alone in the Hall of Bones, staring at the flickering shadows on the walls. Age had begun to tug at his joints, silver threaded through his dark hair. Years of battle had left scars across his arms and torso, each a memory of victory. Fear crept into his mind, not of dying in battle, but of slipping away into nothingness. He whispered to the empty hall that he would not accept oblivion. He made a vow. If the gods did not grant him a place among them, he would carve his own seat. Whether he believed in gods or not, his actions took on a ritualistic fervor. He began to collect relics from far away, items believed to be imbued with power, stones carved with ancient sigils, metallic fragments rumored to have fallen from the stars, bones of creatures long extinct. He tasked his war bands with seeking knowledge along with plunder. Many died lost in blizzards or slain by beasts, but some returned with tablets etched in languages few could read. He was uninterested in their provenance. He only cared about what secrets they held. His nights were spent poring over symbols by firelight, searching for a key. As he aged, his war bands were led more by his generals, men raised under his doctrine of brutal efficiency. They mirrored his ruthlessness. Villages that surrendered were drafted into his ranks. Those that resisted were wiped out. In their wake came priests collecting skulls and spoils for the hall. His empire had become not just a territory, but an organism that fed on conquest. To the south, beyond the wildlands, rumors spread of a barbarian king whose army advanced like a plague. Coastal cities began to arm themselves, sending emissaries north with overtures for trade. San Uzal laughed at their gifts and demanded tribute instead. He knew fear traveled faster than men. Years before his first death, there were signs of the empire's fragility. Far-flung warbands lost contact. Harsh winters decimated herds. The endless cycle of war created as many enemies as vassals. Yet San Uzal pressed on. His resolve, his ego, his fear of insignificance drove him to expand beyond reason. He believed if he stopped conquering, he would begin to die. He ignored the counsel of those who urged consolidation. Some historians would later argue that, had he slowed, his empire might have endured beyond his lifetime. But endurance without glory meant nothing to him. He wanted it all: the land, the power, and the eternity promised by the Hall of Bones. He intended to wrest immortality from the jaws of death itself. Chapter 3. Decline, Death, and the Empty Veil. San Uzal's final years were marked by exhaustion masked with fury. His body, once a temple of muscle and relentless motion, slowed fractionally with each campaign, though he would not admit it. His eyes remained sharp, but aches lingered longer after battle. He ignored the tremor in his hand when holding his cup. He dismissed coughs that racked him in the cold nights. To show weakness would invite challenge, and he would sooner cut his own throat than show frailty. The war bands continued their relentless march, and he still led charges where arrows fell like rain, his roar a rallying cry. But the signs were a whispered word among his captains, a cautious glance shared between advisors. Our king is aging. During a skirmish on the plains against a coalition of southern city-states that had dared to invade his lands, San Uzal felt the weight of years all at once. The enemy's lines broke before his assault, yet as he strode over fallen bodies to pursue the fleeing soldiers, his chest tightened. He stumbled, catching himself on the haft of his spear. For a moment the world spun. He shook it away and pressed on, but the tremor remained. After the battle he sat by the river, away from his men. He stared at his reflection, noting the deep lines carved by wind and sun. He knew then that his mortal body was failing. The shamaness approached, sensing his mood. She offered him a potion brewed from herbs and blood. He drank it without question, though he knew such brews were as likely to poison as to heal. He refused to die of illness, but he could not deny the weight of mortality pressing on his shoulders. In the months that followed, he withdrew more into himself. He spent long hours in the Hall of Bones, communing with whatever lay beyond his reach. He whispered in languages he had learned from foreign scripts. He carved symbols into wooden planks and burned them, inhaling the smoke as though it were communion with the gods. He held audience with his generals less often, trusting them to prosecute his wars without needing his oversight. They took this as a sign of approval. Little did they know he planned for more than worldly conquest. Death came without ceremony. He was not felled by a blade or pierced by an arrow. One night, as he sat on his throne carved from skulls, gazing at flickering shadows, he simply ceased to breathe. The shamaness found him at dawn, his eyes open but unseeing, his lips curved into the slightest hint of a smile. Perhaps he had seen his hall of immortals in that final moment. Perhaps he had glimpsed the void. Word spread through the camp like wildfire. Warriors pounded their chests and howled. Some believed his spirit already sat at the god's table, his cup overflowing. Others whispered the old fear that there were no gods at all, and he had vanished into nothing. His body was prepared according to ancient custom. His skin was painted with charcoal and ochre. His hair, once dark and thick, was braided and tied with strips of leather taken from his enemies. They laid him upon a bier covered in furs and carried him to a pyre constructed on the highest hill. The sky was clear, the air sharp with the coming of winter. Thousands gathered to watch as flames consumed the body of the man who had consumed so many lives. Smoke rose like a column toward the heavens, swirling with ash. In that smoke, many claimed, shapes formed the faces of those he had slain, the grin of a skull, the outline of a throne. The shamaness sang a song that spoke of warriors welcomed into the Hall of Bones, of feasts unending and battles never lost. San Uzal's ashes were scattered to the wind, and yet, when his last breath left his body, he did not ascend to any hall. He awoke in that grey wasteland in the prologue to this story, standing barefoot upon cold sand. There were no drums, no ancestors. The emptiness was total. The anger he had managed to keep at bay his entire life flared white hot. He howled, a sound that rattled the formless air. There was no echo. Fury prevented him from dissolving like the other spirits that roamed the fog. His rage, his unending will, and his utter refusal to accept oblivion bound his essence like iron bands. This was his second conquest, though he did not yet know it. Wandering that void, he began to hear whispers that were not his own. Voices flitted just beyond his comprehension. They were not the voices of ancestors or gods. They were disembodied fragments of those who had died, some ancient, some recent, all lost. At first they were meaningless, a cacophony of misery. Slowly they coalesced into patterns. Words formed, harsh and guttural, in a tongue he instinctively knew was forbidden. Oknun. It was not a language of the living. It was a language of power. As he listened, he realized that this was the language of the realm beyond, the language of true death. He learned it not through teaching, but through desperate necessity, straining to understand the murmurs that promised escape from emptiness. With each word he deciphered, he gained clarity. His will reached out beyond his immediate surroundings, probing the veil between worlds. He sensed a faint pull toward the realm he had left. If he could find someone, anyone who would listen, he could return. He began to whisper into the void in Oknun, his voice now a shard of steel amidst the whispering sands. He offered strength to any who would call him back. He promised dominion to those who dared summon him. The void whispered back, recognizing the indomitable will of a soul that refused to fade. It was not an immediate triumph. Time continued to stretch meaningless. He felt himself thinning at the edges like smoke on wind, but each moment he spoke in the forbidden tongue anchored him. The voices around him shifted from disjointed murmurs to conspiratorial suggestions. They told him of mortals dabbling in dark magic, of covens that sought power beyond their grasp. They promised that he would be known again, not as San Uzal, but as something greater. His fury cooled into cold determination. He waited, whispering across the veil until his call was heard. Chapter 4. Resurrection of Iron and Hate. In the material world, decades after San Uzal's empire fractured and his legend began to fade into myth, a coven of ambitious sorcerers stumbled upon scraps of knowledge they could barely comprehend. They were scholars of the profane, exiled from their communities for pursuing forbidden arts. Their hunger for power drove them together. Rumors reached them of an ancient warlord whose soul refused to pass into oblivion, a spirit that whispered in dreams and promised strength unrivaled by any mortal. Drawn by the temptation of harnessing such a force, they conducted rituals in hidden caves, dripping blood onto carved stones etched with unknown runes. At first, nothing happened. Then, on a night when thunder rolled above the mountains, the ground shook and a cold wind snuffed out their candles. In the darkness, a voice spoke, not with words of any earthly language, but with the unholy syllables of Oknun. The sorcerers felt the voice within their bones, offering a bargain. Grant me form, and I will grant you dominion over death. desire blinded them to caution. They agreed, believing they could bind this ancient soul and use it as a weapon in their petty wars. The voice guided them in constructing a vessel. They melted iron from weapons taken off battlefields, mixing in grave dust and ash. They poured this molten metal into molds shaped not by practical smiths, but by sorcerous instruction, the plates curved like bones, flanges like ribs. They forged a massive breastplate inscribed with words no living tongue spoke, shoulder guards like jagged cliffs, gauntlets ending in talons. They bound these pieces with heavy chain and spiked straps. When the armor cooled, it seemed to breathe, exhaling vapor in the chill air. At its heart, they placed a shard of black stone taken from a meteor that had fallen long ago, believing it would anchor the spirit. The ritual was gruesome. The sorcerers stood in a circle around the armor, chanting in Ochnun as they cut their palms and let their blood drip onto the black stone. The voice on the other side guided their incantations, weaving their life force into a tether. The temperature dropped until frost formed on their brows. The black stone pulsed. A swirling vortex of cold and shadows condensed above the armor and poured into it with a sound like tearing flesh. The ground trembled. The sorcerers staggered back, horror mixing with triumph as the armor jerked upright of its own accord. The empty plates clanged together, chains rattled, a plume of vapor hissed from between the helm's visor. 2 pinpoints of green light ignited within the darkness of the helm. San Uzal breathed again, though not with lungs. He felt weight, the sensation of iron encasing him, the weight of chains. He flexed metal fingers and watched as gauntlets clenched. He was no longer flesh. He was something else. He towered over the sorcerers, his new form immense and imposing. He could feel their fear like heat on his skin. He could also feel their intentions, their attempts to bind him. They had inscribed runes of subjugation into the armor, spells meant to force obedience. He smiled a laugh like grinding stone, appreciating their arrogance. They thought to use him as a tool, but he had been a warlord in life and death. He spoke his first word in Ochnun aloud, a name that cut through the air like a blade. Mordekaiser. The sorcerers flinched. One, braver or more foolish than the rest, stepped forward and raised a staff tipped with a skull. "Our will commands you," she intoned, voice wavering. "You are bound to us, weapon of iron and darkness." Mordekaiser tilted his head. He reached down and closed his hand around the staff. With a squeeze, the wood splintered. He lifted the sorcerer off the ground as easily as lifting a child. "You mistake your desires for power," he said, his voice like distant thunder. He slammed the sorcerer into the stone floor. Bone shattered. The remaining coven recoiled, quickly trying to utter incantations of binding. Their words faltered as Mordekaiser strode through their circle, his mace an instrument of his will forming from coalescing metal in his hand. Nightfall. He swung it once, a blur of black iron that crushed a skull into pulp. Another fell. Ribcage caved in. Panic overcame their discipline. They screamed, casting spells that sparked against his armor harmlessly. He waded through them like wheat, each strike precise. He did not need to hurry. They had given him what he needed, a body anchored in the physical world. Their deaths were an added pleasure. As he killed them, he spoke words of binding not to subjugate himself, but to claim their souls. Green wisps tore from their mouths and eyes as life left them, spiraling into him. For the first time, he felt the delicious surge of necromantic power. Souls could be used, he realized, as both fuel and mortar. He tethered them to him, not as equals, but as thralls. They would build his foundation in this new existence. When the last sorcerer lay broken, he surveyed the blood-spattered cavern. The iron plates of his armor dripped crimson. He raised his newly formed mace and pointed its jagged head toward the cavern entrance. Outside, his first army waited. Corpses, skeletons, and spirits he would compel. He strode into the night, feeling the cold wind against iron and chain. Thus began his second conquest, not of tribes and wildlands, but of the entire mortal realm, armed with knowledge of death and a body that could not tire. Word of his return spread first as rumor, then as legend. Villagers spoke of an iron giant laying waste to war camps, his mace crushing men and spirits alike. Soldiers whispered of a revenant who could not be killed, who rose from a pile of arrows with laughter. Mages told tales of a necromancer who understood a language that made the dead obey. Entire militias fled rather than face him. Mordekaiser delighted in their fear. He was a warlord once more, but now his ambitions extended beyond simple territory. He was no longer bound by the limitations of flesh. He craved knowledge and power over life and death, over realms seen and unseen. The first structure he built upon his return was not a hall for feasting, but a fortress of iron and hatred. At the place where the sorcerers had summoned him, he commanded his thralls to strip the ground of stone and carve foundations. The spirits of the sorcerers, now slaves bound to his will, chanted incantations to shape metal with their spectral hands. Iron rose from the ground like black thorns, coiling and twining into walls. He named this fortress the Immortal Bastion. Here he would anchor himself to the physical realm. The fortress was more than a seat of power. It was a nexus, a conduit between his afterlife and the world of the living. Its foundations were infused with Ochnan script, each sigil a trap for souls, each iron plate a rune of binding. He sat upon a throne forged from iron and bone at its center, and proclaimed himself not just a warlord, but an emperor of death. Chapter 5. The Second Empire and Necromantic Dominion. Mordekaiser's Second Empire rose quickly, fed by fear and the dark energies he wielded. Entire villages capitulated without a fight upon hearing the thunderous approach of his legions. He recruited the living with promises of immortality or threats of eternal servitude. Those who submitted were given arms and commanded to serve him in life. Those who resisted were slain and enslaved in death. His army became a terrifying amalgam of flesh and spirit. Skeletal warriors marched alongside husk-eyed soldiers. Shadows clung to iron armor like cloaks, whispering in Ochnan. At the front strode Mordekaiser, taller than any man, his black iron plate bearing nicks and scars from countless battles. His mace nightfall humming with stolen souls. When he swung, the air itself shuddered. His dominion extended far beyond the wildlands he once called home. He marched south into fertile valleys where city-states had flourished for generations. Their stone walls and trained militias might have held against a mortal army, but they crumbled before a warlord who could drag their champions into a realm of his own making. Mordekaiser tested his powers on the battlefield. Pointing at a commander atop the battlements, he uttered an incantation and tore at the fabric between worlds. Shadows swirled, and the man vanished. his scream cut off as he was pulled into a dead dimension where only Mordekaiser and his chosen prey existed. In that realm he was omnipotent, the landscape reflecting his will. He toyed with his victim, prolonging fear, then ended the man with a contemptuous blow. When he returned to the physical world, he held the man's soul trapped within his armor as an energy he could consume later. The defenders watched their commander vanish and did not see him again. Terror crippled them. Siege weapons burned under ghostly green fire, moats filled with spectral hands dragging soldiers to watery graves. The walls of city after city were breached from within by spirits slaved to Ocnan, phasing through stone to unbar gates. Mordekaiser's forces never slept. When battle ended, necromancers, his priests now walked the fields collecting the dead. They chanted, and pale lights rose from corpses, drifting like fireflies toward cages in the immortal bastion. These souls would not fade, they would join the mortar of his afterlife. For every soldier he lost, he gained 2 more in spirit and obedience. To his enemies, it appeared as though he cared only for slaughter and destruction. He razed temples, tore down statues, and burned fields. Entire generations perished under his relentless campaigns. Yet, beneath the veneer of brute force, there was deeper purpose. At the center of his empire, he expanded the immortal bastion. Its walls grew taller and thicker, its foundations dug deeper. He hollowed out chambers beneath it, inscribing every surface with Oshnan script. Hidden within these catacombs were libraries of forbidden knowledge. He collected scrolls, tomes, and relics from every civilization he conquered. He compelled captive mages to translate ancient languages and reveal secrets long thought lost. Many refused and were broken, their souls torn asunder for their defiance. The knowledge he gleaned fed his necromancy. He began to understand not just how to command the dead, but why death existed at all, and how it could be circumvented. One artifact he coveted above all others was the Tome of Spirits, rumored to contain the sum of knowledge from an entire civilization destroyed when a volcano erupted centuries prior. The tome was said to bind the names of spirits within its pages. It had been hidden in a sanctum protected by wards of light and heat. Mordekaiser could not send thralls. The wards destroyed them. He went himself. In the sanctum, 13 mages stood in a circle, each prepared to sacrifice their life to keep him from the tome. They cast spells of searing flame, blue fire that engulfed his iron form. The heat cracked stone and melted flesh. Mordekaiser strode through the onslaught, his armor glowing, his cape ablaze. He raised Nightfall, pulsing emerald, and slammed it into the floor. The impact sent a shockwave of necrotic energy that stripped the flesh from their bones. He mocked them as they burned, warning them that brutality should not be mistaken for ignorance. When the last mage fell, he claimed the Tome of Spirits, tapping his mace upon the ground to bind their souls. 13 points of light rose and sank into the earth, now his forever. In his great hall within the immortal bastion, he sat upon a throne that hummed with stolen life. Ochun's script ran along its iron arms like veins. The voices of the bound souls were a chorus, a constant cacophony that might have driven a lesser mind to madness. To him, it was music. He kept the worthy spirits, those of strong warriors, cunning strategists, and brilliant mages near. They stood at attention along the hall, shimmering phantoms clad in ghostly armor, ready to be summoned. He held counsel with them, questioning them on their knowledge of realms beyond. Those who proved useful were allowed to retain a semblance of self. Those who defied him were broken down and used to reinforce the walls of his afterworld. Even in death, there was hierarchy determined by Mordekaiser's whim. His fortress's architecture reflected his philosophy. Massive iron pillars rose like the trunks of petrified trees, tapering to vicious points that scratched the ceiling. No light entered save for the sickly green glow emanating from runes and souls. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the towering figure of Mordekaiser, making it seem as if he stood upon an endless abyss. The air was heavy with the scent of iron and something unnameable. He enjoyed walking its halls, hearing the endless wailing of souls as one might listen to rain on stone. He did not tire. He had all the time he needed. Despite his seeming invincibility, seeds of rebellion took root within his empire. Not everyone was content to be ruled by an undead tyrant. The peoples he had conquered harbored resentment and fear. In hidden places, leaders met in whispers, planning insurrection. Among them were those who had served Mordekaiser faithfully, generals and advisors who had grown too accustomed to power and bristled at the idea of serving forever. They sought allies among the Noxi tribes, those same peoples San Uzal had once unified. These tribes had little left of their former identity. They were now forced to supply soldiers and resources to the bastion. They remembered tales of the conqueror, but they had come to hate the revenant he had become. One night, as Mordekaiser studied an ancient scroll by green candlelight, a whisper reached him, not from the souls bound to him, but from an unexpected source. It was a voice he had not heard in a long time. It spoke of betrayal. A cabal formed within his own inner circle, guided by a pale sorceress whose name even mortals feared to speak. She and her followers had discovered that Mordekaiser's soul was anchored to his armor through specific runes and chains. If these anchors were severed, his spirit could be cast back into the void. The realization did not anger him. Instead, it amused him. It confirmed what he had suspected. Those around him were thinking, scheming, still mortal despite their dealings with death. He also recognized a deeper truth. This was his opportunity to further his plan, for Mordekaiser was no fool. He understood that his presence in the physical realm was only one stage of his conquest. He needed to be able to move freely between realms at will. He allowed the seeds of betrayal to sprout. The rebellion formed quickly. Noxi tribesmen, emboldened by promises from the pale sorceress, united with foreign mercenaries and disillusioned generals. They knew a frontal assault would fail. Instead, they infiltrated the immortal bastion under cover of darkness with the help of traitors who opened sealed doors. They descended into its deepest chambers, their hearts pounding, breath fogging in the chill. They found the chamber where Mordekaiser's armor lay when he was not wearing it, suspended above a pit by chains inscribed with Uchnun. They had learned from spies that when he meditated, he removed his armor to commune with his afterworld. Now was their chance. They hammered at the chains with enchanted axes and tools. Sparks flew. The runes resisted, but the pale sorceress led them in a chant that unraveled the spells. One by one, the anchors snapped. In the hall above, Mordekaiser, deep in meditation, felt each connection break. He smiled and surrendered to what came next. When the final chain shattered, his armor collapsed into a heap. Without its vessel, his spirit was sucked back into the void between worlds. He was cast out of the material realm. His betrayers rejoiced, sealing the empty iron shell away in a secret place. They sang songs of liberation, believing the tyrant gone forever. They were wrong. Mordekaiser had planned for this. He had left imprints of his will across his empire, had constructed rituals that could be completed even in his absence. Cast back into the emptiness where he had once wandered helpless and enraged, he found himself prepared. He had learned how to survive here. He summoned to him the souls of those who had died under his reign. He called their names in Ochnun, and they answered, gathering around him like moths to flame. He bound them, wove them, and began to build. The emptiness he had once cursed would become his workshop. From the subtle matter of their souls, he forged a realm. Chapter 6. Forging the Afterworld. The void was no longer a place of despair. Mordekaiser saw it as raw potential. In that grey nothingness, he began to sculpt. Using necromantic power and will, he drew souls into shape like a blacksmith draws iron into a blade. He discovered that the essence of a soul could be malleable. With one gesture, he could unravel it into strands of glowing filaments. With another, he could weave those filaments into solid structures. He experimented, failing many times as constructs collapsed back into mist. But with each attempt, he learned. Soon, towers rose from the fog, coalescing from wisps into gleaming black iron. Walls emerged, not of stone, but of souls compressed into a dense, dark material. He shaped bridges over chasms that existed only because he willed them to. He carved great halls with ceilings so high they vanished into mist, buttressed by pillars inscribed with Ochnun runes. He named his creation Mitna Rachnun, the Afterworld. It was both fortress and kingdom, an entire reality forged from the dead. At its heart, he built a citadel that mirrored the immortal bastion, though far larger and more imposing. Its gates were adorned with screaming faces that once belonged to kings, sorcerers, and warlords who had defied him. Its ramparts were lined with phantasmal warriors, their eyes glowing green. Within, there were endless chambers, libraries filled with memories, armories housing weapons forged from pure will, dungeons where rebellious spirits were broken and remade. He constructed a throne for himself from twisted iron and bound souls. When he sat upon it, he could feel every spirit in his domain, each like a small ember in a great fire. If he willed it, he could snuff them out or inflame them. Time flowed differently in Mitna Rachnun. Moments could stretch into years, and years could pass in a heartbeat. This allowed Mordekaiser to work relentlessly. He refined the language of Ochnun, creating new sigils that represented concepts like dominion, eternity, and transformation. He inscribed these on every surface, embedding them into the fabric of his realm. He taught the language to his chosen few, spirits he deemed worthy to serve as his generals. Among them were the souls of warlords he had slain, wise scholars who had once opposed him, even some of the sorcerers who had resurrected him. They stood before him, not as his equal, but as instruments sharpened by his will. He granted them forms, a twisted echo of the bodies they once had, so they could command legions of spirits on his behalf. Mordekaiser's experiments with necromancy advanced beyond anything the living could comprehend. He learned to dissect a soul into its constituent parts: memory, personality, emotion. He discovered that by separating memory from emotion, he could erase loyalty or instill fear. He could bind a soul's essence to an object, such as a weapon or a wall, and have it act as an anchor. He tested his abilities by creating simulacra of living people, then dissolving them to understand the limits of his craft. He could peel a soul from its mortal body and draw it into his realm, even while the body still lived, leaving behind an empty shell. He began to see death not as an end, but as a resource to manipulate. But Mitna was not just a place to study, it was a fortress designed for war. Mordekaiser had not given up on the mortal world. He intended to return. This time he wanted a way to bring his realm with him. In the deepest chamber of the citadel, he forged a relic, a heart of sorts, using the black meteor stone from his armor and infused with millions of souls. This relic would act as a bridge between realms. If placed within the immortal bastion, it would connect Mitna to the physical world, allowing him to draw energy and souls directly, and to manifest fully whenever he wished. His second death had taught him that his anchor must be hidden and protected. He crafted guardians from the souls of his most loyal followers, binding them around the relic. These guardians could not be swayed by persuasion or fear. Their minds were erased of everything except the duty to protect. As he built, more souls arrived. Many were those who had died under his rule, their spirits bound by dark sorcery to him. Others were drawn by the faint pull of his language like moths to a flame. Some were worthy warriors whose ferocity in life impressed him. He rewarded them by giving them positions of authority, commanding troops in his ghostly legions. Others were weak or unworthy, their wills quickly broken. He used them as mortar, pressing them into walls and floors. Even the smallest soul had a use. Nothing was wasted. In his domain there was no rest, only purpose. Outside of Mitna the world continued. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The place where his immortal bastion stood became the heart of a new empire, Noxus, built by people who valued strength and cunning. Its leaders ruled from chambers constructed around his long-sealed armor, oblivious to the relic hidden deep within. Only a few ancient souls remembered Mordekaiser's first reign, and they whispered his name with fear and awe. Legends painted him as a myth or a cautionary tale. But in quiet corners, some studied forbidden texts and wondered if the Iron Revenant was truly gone. Among those who pondered such things was a bloodthirsty fiend haunting the coastal cliffs of eastern Valoran during the height of Mordekaiser's reign. This fiend demanded young lives and savage worship. He was rarely seen, more myth than man, until the day a pale sorceress approached him with an offer, an alliance that would benefit them both. She was part of a cabal called the Black Rose, a group that thrived on hidden power and manipulative games. Over wine that turned black and roses that withered at their touch, they formed a pact. Together they wove dark magic, each learning from the other. Vladimir, as he would come to be known, absorbed enough power to renew flesh indefinitely. The pale sorceress learned more about blood and life. They became orchestrators of schemes that would span centuries. While Mordekaiser expanded his afterworld, his influence seeped back into the mortal realm through whispers and dreams. Occultists woke, shaking from nightmares of a towering figure in an iron helm standing in a hall lined with screaming faces. Warriors faced him in their dreams, only to awaken drenched in sweat, feeling as though they had fought a battle. In remote shrines dedicated to forgotten gods, Priests who chanted the wrong syllables found themselves dragged into a black void where a figure with glowing eyes asked them questions and then either released them or kept them forever. These incidents were dismissed by most as superstition, but a few saw patterns. They realized something ancient lingered beneath Noxus's capital, waiting. As centuries turned, Mordekaiser's patience grew. He was immortal now, and time was a tool. Each decade allowed him to refine his realm further. He added new layers of defenses, labyrinthine corridors that twisted back on themselves, traps that ensnared spirits and shredded them into raw energy, towers that could channel necromantic blasts across dimensions. He filled his libraries with everything he had learned, scribbling in Ochnen with ink made from condensed souls. He wrote treatises on the nature of existence, diagrams of the connections between realms, plans for structures he would one day build in the living world. He was equal parts warlord and scholar. At last, after ages of work, Midna Rachnun neared completion. Its final towers were erected, spires of black iron piercing the formless sky. Its battlements were lined with phantoms ready to defend. Its heart pulsed with energy, anchored by the relic awaiting placement in the immortal bastion. Mordekaiser stood atop the highest tower and surveyed his creation with dark pride. Where there had once been nothingness, he had forged his own reality. He clenched his iron fist and felt the entire realm thrum in response. Every soul, every wall, every rune was connected to him. The afterworld was complete. Now he would turn his attention fully to the living world. Chapter 7. The Shadows of Noxus and Human Schemes. While Mordekaiser built his afterworld, the mortal realm evolved. The immortal bastion, once a citadel of fear, became the heart of a thriving empire called Noxus. Its people honored strength above all. They believed that anyone could rise to power through ability and ruthlessness, regardless of birth. This meritocratic ideal masked the reality that noble houses still wielded considerable influence, and that secrets often proved more potent than armies. In the low halls beneath the bastion, a shadowy cabal known as the Black Rose operated, pulling strings and weaving plans that spanned generations. They believed they controlled Noxus from the shadows, but even their understanding of the immortal bastion's true nature was limited. Jericho Swain, born centuries after Mordekaiser's second death, was a patrician by birth, but a soldier by choice. Ambitious and intelligent, he rose through the military ranks, exposing a conspiracy of noble houses that sought power for its own sake. Among those he executed were his own parents. They had hungered for greater influence and had plotted against Emperor Borum Darkwill in a secret cabal united by nothing more than the symbol of a black rose. For their treachery, Swain served justice. He learned of a shapeless voice crackling in the darkness of the immortal bastion, something like a raven's call, which the cabal sought to harness. This entity whispered of secrets and power. Swain, cast out for exposing the cabal, became obsessed with uncovering what truly lay within the bastion. When Noxus invaded Ionia, Swain's forces were routed at the Battle of the Placidium. Gravely wounded, his knee shattered, his left arm severed, Swain saw his own blood pooling on the ground. As he lay near death, a raven approached him, a raven that was more than a bird. In its eyes he saw reflections of a much deeper darkness strangling the heart of Noxus. He had glimpsed the demon within the immortal bastion, the same entity the Black Rose had attempted to awaken, and he realized that his failure was part of a larger scheme. After being cast out of the military for his perceived failure, Sweyn delved into the depths of the bastion, seeking the true power hidden within. He stared into the darkness and saw what even the demon could not, a way to wield it. Sweyn formed alliances with those still loyal to him. Over years he prepared meticulously. When the time was right, he seized control of Noxus in a single night, physically restored by the demon he had once glimpsed. He executed Darkwill before his followers, leaving the throne empty. He established the Tripharics, ensuring that no individual would rule unopposed. His vision for Noxus was one of strength through unity, a stark contrast to Mordekaiser's dominion through fear. He pulled back the war hosts from unwinnable campaigns and made Noxus more efficient. Yet, even as he shaped the empire, he sensed greater threats lurking just beyond. He foresaw that sacrifices would be needed for the blood of Noxus. Though he did not know it, his actions were indirectly influenced by the presence beneath the bastion, a presence that now stirred in preparation to return. Vladimir, the ancient blood mage, weaved in and out of the Empire's history like a dark thread. He was present at the dawn of the Empire and had since woven his influence deep into its foundations. His mind was mortal, yet he had absorbed enough power to renew his flesh through rituals too vile to speak. He taught hemomancy to the military, creating the Crimson Circle, a cult dedicated to blood magic. During his many centuries, he watched rulers come and go, allies rise and fall. He rarely limited himself to scheming from the shadows. At interesting times, he deigned to join the Noxian noble courts, only to vanish into a seclusion decades later. With the death of the previous Grand General and the rise of Jericho Sweyn, the political landscape of Noxus shifted dramatically, and Vladimir was forced to rouse himself once more. Wearing the guise of a benevolent socialite, he returned to the public eye, a vocal opponent of the Tripharics Council. In secret, his reappearance may have come too soon, for it seemed likely that Sweyn himself had begun to grasp Vladimir's true nature. The Black Rose continued its games, sometimes aligned with Noxian interests, sometimes opposed. Their machinations were dedicated to gathering power and resurrecting ancient secrets. They had been among those who orchestrated Mordekaiser's second death, severing his soul from his armor. Their motives were not altruistic. They sought to control or destroy what they did not understand. As centuries passed, membership rotated. New faces took up the mantle, and the pale sorceress who had once bargained with Vladimir became a legend known only as the Pale Woman. She spoke in the ears of kings and generals, manipulated events from behind veils, and maintained the Cabal's continuity. The demon within the immortal bastion, known in whispers as realm fed on secrets and whispered bargains. It was a creature of Ionia originally, bound to a bird that became Sweyn's constant companion. Its presence and powers were distinct from Mordekaiser's, yet resonated with the same dark vibrations. When Sweyn merged with the demon, he gained insight into secrets otherwise unfathomable. Among those secrets was a distant echo, the heartbeat of a relic buried deep beneath the bastion, pulsing with necromantic energy. Sweyn could feel its pull, but did not yet comprehend what it represented. The demon delighted in the taste of secrets, but did not share them freely. Mordekaiser's relic remained hidden, biding its time. In the world beyond Noxus, other powers stirred. Vastire tribes, roamed jungles far to the east, unaffected by Noxian politics. In Shurima, an ancient empire reawakened when a lost emperor returned from ascension. In the Freljord, warlike tribes battled for dominance, their conflicts echoing those of the Noxi tribes of old. Piltover and Zaun rose as centers of innovation, harnessing technology and hextech. Demacia held firm to its rigid ideals, its mage hunters vigilant. Throughout Runeterra, the balance of power shifted constantly, creating a tapestry of alliances and enmities that complicated any attempt at domination. Many of these nations knew nothing of the Iron Revenant, though some scholars in Demacia's libraries whispered of a cursed warlord whose armor was said to be indestructible. None suspected that he would return. In secret, cults dedicated to Mordekaiser's eventual return emerged. These cultists studied Oknun in dark caves lit with green fire. They procured relics stolen from the immortal Bastion and attempted to replicate the rituals that had once forged his armor. Many perished when spirits they did not understand consumed them. Others succeeded in creating minor abominations, animated suits of armor possessing a fragment of the Revenant's will. These constructs roamed the countryside, slaughtering indiscriminately until destroyed by local militias or the Demacian mage seekers. Each failed attempt, each whispered chant, each sacrifice was a note in a song that reverberated across realms, strengthening Mordekaiser's hold. Meanwhile, Mordekaiser watched, amused. He watched as Swain wrestled with the demon realm and glimpsed secrets. He watched as Vladimir and the Pale Woman danced their eternal dance of manipulation. He watched as Noxus waged war and practiced politics, oblivious to the relic pulsing beneath their capital. He watched as Demacia declared itself a righteous kingdom and as Ionia healed from scars. Through his connection to the relic and through his mastery of necromancy, he sent subtle tendrils of his influence into the dreams of those he might one day need. He planted seeds of ambition in the minds of young warriors. He whispered promises of power to frustrated mages. He encouraged conflict that would yield more souls for his domain. Each whisper was carefully measured, part of a grand design that only he could see fully. Though centuries had passed in the mortal realm to Mordekaiser, they were but chapters in an epic. He did not rush. He knew that for his final return to be permanent, several conditions had to be met. His afterworld had to be complete. His relic had to be placed within the heart of the immortal Bastion. The connections between realms had to be strengthened. He had to gather enough souls to fuel a return that could not easily be thwarted. The pieces moved slowly across the board. Others played their games of thrones, of revenge and honor, unaware of the larger game unfolding beneath their feet. Chapter 8. The Final Spire and the Tome of Spirits. In Midna Rachnun, work continued until only one construction remained, the final spire. It would complete the last tower of his afterworld, anchoring his realm firmly so that it could withstand even the intervention of gods. Mordekaiser stood before the half-formed tower, iron fist raised. A surge of necromantic power burst from him. Inky smoke coalesced into black iron, twisting upward. The spire's shape grew, tendrils of smoke weaving into solid metal. Souls screamed as they were stretched and bound, their wails harmonizing into a sound that resonated through the entire afterworld. Mordekaiser watched, cold pride flooding his being. When the final piece slid into place with a resounding clang, he felt the entire realm settle. Midna Rachnun was complete. He surveyed the completed afterworld. Towers rose like serrated teeth against the grey sky. Ramparts ran for leagues, each crenellation carved with script that glowed a faint green. Bridges arched over chasms of oblivion. Courtyards were paved with polished soul glass that reflected ghostly faces. Every stone, every wall, every banner thrummed with his will. If one listened carefully, one could hear countless voices, the whispers of the bound. To Mordekaiser, it was symphony. He clenched his gauntleted hand, and ripples ran through the realm, reinforcing his connection. Mitna Rachnun was ready to serve not just as refuge, but as a weapon. With his realm finished, Mordekaiser turned his attention fully to knowledge. The tome of spirits, recovered through blood and fire, lay floating above a pedestal in a hall built specifically to hold it. Its cover was bound in leathery skin from an otherworldly creature, its pages shimmering with arcane script that shifted and shimmered like water. It did not obey gravity. It hovered, the air around it humming. Mordekaiser approached, his armor clanking softly. Only he dared handle the tome. Lesser beings had been consumed by its contents, their minds unable to handle the knowledge within. He read, not with eyes alone, but with mind and essence, absorbing lines of script that recorded the names of spirits and the rules governing their binding. He learned that each soul had a true name that, if spoken in the language of Oshnun, gave power over it. He learned methods to erase names and to graft false names, effectively rewriting the identity of a soul. He discovered how souls could be merged into greater constructs without losing coherence. He memorized runes that allowed him to channel entire legions through narrow conduits between realms. The knowledge was intoxicating and dangerous. He realized why the mages had been willing to die rather than let him obtain it. To them, it had been too powerful to trust to any one being. To him, it was a weapon to be used with precision. As he studied, an echo of his mortal frustration returned. In his first life, he had sought immortality through conquest alone. In his second, he had gained it through necromancy. But knowledge and empire were not ends in themselves. He wanted dominion over existence. The Tome of Spirits hinted at possibilities. If he could bind enough souls, if he could control the very cycle of life and death, he could reshape reality. In his mind formed the image of a world where no one died without his permission, where every soul fed his realm. He would be more than a god. He would be the architect of eternity. Not all knowledge came from the tome. He continued to pull souls into his realm, interrogating those who had witnessed strange phenomena. He dragged seers in dreams into his halls and questioned them about visions of other planes. He captured the spirits of ancient mages who had glimpsed celestial realms and demanded they map them for him. He tested his understanding by creating small pockets of reality within Mitna Rachnun, then collapsing them, measuring how they responded. Each experiment, each interrogation, each line of script expanded his understanding of the cosmos. During one such experiment, he noticed a disturbance in his hall. 13 phantasmal lights rose from the floor, wavering, then sank. It was a response to something happening in the mortal realm. He focused his attention through the relic, peering into the physical world. In a hidden chamber beneath the immortal bastion, a group of mages, descendants of the coven that had first raised him, attempted to replicate the ritual of summoning. They had stolen pages from the Tome of Spirits and thought themselves prepared. Mordekaiser watched with mild curiosity as they drew a sigil on the floor and chanted. He considered granting them their wish, if only to add their souls to his collection. He reached out through the relic and whispered in Oshnun. They heard the syllables and shuddered. One screamed and fell to the ground, his soul ripped free. The others fled in terror. Mordekaiser laughed, a deep sound that rolled through Mitna Rashnun like thunder. He would not be summoned by mortals who believed they held power. He would return when he chose. With the afterworld complete and the knowledge of the tome assimilated, Mordekaiser turned his attention to the throne he had built at the center of his hall. Its iron pillars tapered to vicious points, and Ochun's script circled the dais like snakes. Incessant whispering emanated from it, the subsumed souls within crying out, desperate and endless. He placed his hand on the armrest and felt pride. The throne represented his mastery. It was a seat that had absorbed more souls in its creation than any other single part of the fortress. The wails emanating from it were music to him, and yet thrones were for mortals, symbols of kings who grew weary and needed to rest. He no longer needed rest. With a thought, he called nightfall to his hands. He swung the mace. The throne shattered into twisted shards. A squall of 100 souls spiraled upward, shrieking as they were released. They dissipated into oblivion. Mordekaiser watched them vanish, grim satisfaction on his spectral features. He did not need a throne to rule. He was his throne. He stepped atop the twisted iron and looked out across his great hall. His general souls of those who had died at his own hand when he last walked the physical realm stood at attention. None flinched, none moved without his direct command. He raised his mace. "Now," he said, his voice echoing through the hall, "our kingdom is truly ready." He marched from the hall toward the heart of his fortress, to the relic that tied Mitna Rashnun to the mortal realm. This relic, this pulsing black heart, would be inserted into the immortal bastion. The energy humming within it made the air vibrate. He placed his gauntleted hand upon it and felt the surge. The time had come to return. In that moment, memories of his first life flashed across his mind. He had once thought himself a great conqueror, befitting the eternal halls of his faith. How small, how petty, those mortal ambitions seemed now. Back then, he had accepted death as the end. He had used it to justify his conquest. Now he saw death as the beginning. He heard and understood every whisper of this realm with stark clarity. The magic of death coursed through him. He held the arcane secrets gathered over a second lifetime, wrested from the hidden and unknown places of the world. Few other beings could claim mastery of spirit, death, and mortal magics. He would wield them to shape all realms to his iron will. He could feel the souls of Runeterra from where he stood. They called to him like candles waiting to be snuffed or stolen. He took nightfall in one hand and spoke in Ochnun, words that resonated through both the afterworld and the physical realm. The relic pulsed, responded. In the immortal bastion, deep beneath floors of stone and black iron, the hidden relic awakened. It vibrated, sending tremors through the foundations. Dust rained down in secret halls. The demon realm, perched in the shadows of Swain's chamber, felt a ripple and cocked its head. The pale woman paused mid-schemed, sensing something amiss. Vladimir, far from the capital, looked up from his goblet of wine and felt a chill. Across the world, seers and sensitive beings felt a shiver run through their souls, as if someone had just walked over their graves. Mordekaiser raised nightfall high. The mace glowed, pulsed, then went dark. He breathed out a single word, return. And so his final reign began. Chapter 9. The Return to the World of the Living. The immortal bastion shook. Its ancient stones groaned, iron reinforcements creaked, and dust cascaded from high vaults. Deep below the throne room, in catacombs forgotten by all but the oldest members of the Black Rose, the relic pulsed to life. Its surface rippled, veins of green light threading across its black stone. The Guardians Mordekaiser had crafted from the souls of his most loyal followers stirred, their spectral forms shimmering with anticipation. They had waited centuries for this moment, preserving their single purpose. The relic glowed brighter, casting eerie light across the walls. A thin line cracked open above it, slicing through stone and iron, creating a fissure that reached up toward the surface. Above, in Swain's war room, maps trembled. The demon attached to his shoulder tightened its talons. Swain turned, narrowing his eyes. He sensed a disturbance at the very core of the bastion, something resonating with the whispers of the demon. He dismissed his generals and made his way alone down spiraling stairs that most had forgotten existed. Shadows clung to the air. The closer he came to the hidden chamber, the heavier his steps felt, as if the weight of ages pressed down upon him. He reached a door that had not been opened in centuries, its surface covered in rust and runes. The demon on his shoulder hissed, but he placed his remaining hand upon the door and pushed. It opened with a sound like a sigh. Inside, the relic blazed, and in its glow he saw a towering figure coalescing from shadow and iron. Plates of black metal materialized piece by piece, linking together with clicks and clangs. Chains wrapped around limbs and torso. A helm with a jagged crown formed, and within its visor 2 green flames ignited like eyes. Swain recognized the legend in an instant. He had read accounts of the Iron Revenant, dismissed by some as myth. The demon whispered in his mind, excited and frightened. "Mordekaiser," Swain breathed, not in fear, but in calculation. He was a man who saw opportunity in everything. Could this ancient warlord be a threat or a tool? Mordekaiser's new body was magnificent. The armor was heavier, imbued with centuries of refinement. Sigils glowed faintly on its surface. He flexed his fingers, feeling power course through them. He sensed the presence behind him and turned slowly. Swain stood in the doorway, his eyes burning with determination. The demon perched on his shoulder, glaring. The two regarded each other for a long moment, 2 commanders from different ages measuring strengths. "Jericho Swain," Mordekaiser rumbled, his voice like rolling thunder. He had learned many names through whispers and observations. Grand General of Noxus. "You have done well to keep this empire from collapsing under its own weight." Swain did not flinch. "You built the bastion." "I merely repurposed it," he said. "Your time has passed. The world is different." Mordekaiser chuckled, a sound that made the walls vibrate. "The world changes. Power does not. I will take back what is mine." "The people will not follow you," Swain replied. "Noxus owes nothing to ghosts." "People follow strength," Mordekaiser said. "They always have. They always will. You built your Tripharics on unity through ruthlessness. Do not pretend you are different from me." Swain's eyes narrowed. He could feel the demon on his shoulder urging caution, whispering warnings about the soul hunger emanating from the armor. "What is it you want?" he asked, buying time. Mordekaiser lifted nightfall, conjured from the air. Dominion, not just over Noxus, but over all. Swain tilted his head, considering. He was a man willing to make hard choices for his vision of Noxus. "I will not allow you to enslave my people," he said quietly. His left hand, the one he had lost in Ionia, remained spectral, attached to the demon. "But I recognize power. Perhaps there is another way. Noxus has enemies on all sides. Perhaps you can be pointed elsewhere." The Iron Revenant laughed again, amused by the audacity. "You think to bargain with me?" he asked. "You would offer me other souls to spare your own. I admire the pragmatism, but I will not be deflected. Your empire sits atop mine. The souls in your walls are mine. The ground you stand on is mine. Your people live by my sufferance, though they do not yet know it. The conversation could have ended then in violence and blood." Yet Swain was not foolish. He knew he could not defeat Mordekaiser alone. He backed away slowly, planning, already thinking of alliances he would need to forge, of secrets he would need to uncover to counter this threat. The demon realm on his shoulder shivered in delight at the prospect of chaos. "Then we are at odds," Swain said. "Know this, I will do whatever is necessary to protect Noxus." "As will I," Mordekaiser responded, though his notion of protection differed greatly. Swain closed the door and locked it with every rune he knew. He ascended the stairs, heart pounding. Above, he called an emergency meeting of the Trifarics. He would not tell them everything. Secrets were valuable. He would reveal enough to set them on guard. He sent messages to allies and spies. War was coming, and he needed to prepare. Mordekaiser lingered in the chamber for a moment, savoring the feel of stone and iron. The relic pulsed within his chest, connecting him to Mitna Rachnon. He stepped forward. The wall dissolved before him, revealing a tunnel that led into the subterranean depths. He walked, each step heavy, but not because of the weight of his armor. The afterworld pressed against him, like a tide eager to break through. He found a hidden shaft, an escape route built long ago by the pale sorceress who had orchestrated his second death. With a twist of his wrist, he snapped the rusty bars barring it. He climbed, dragging his mace behind him, leaving scratches in the stone. He emerged in the underbelly of Noxus, in a forgotten alley near the outskirts of the capital. It was night. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of roasting meat. The sounds of haggling and laughter drifted through the darkness. He stepped into the street, looming over everyone. His armor caught glints of torchlight, casting a greenish hue. Nearby, a drunk soldier glanced up and froze, the tankard slipping from his grasp. "By the gods," he whispered. Mordekaiser swung his gaze to him. The soldier fell to his knees unbidden. Others, seeing the massive figure, panicked. Some screamed and fled. Others fell to their knees as though compelled. News spread quickly. The Iron Revenant had returned. In taverns and barracks, people whispered tales older than their grandparents. Some dismissed him as a rumor. Others began packing their belongings, planning to flee the city. Mordekaiser ignored them. He walked purposefully toward the immortal bastion's surface entrance, moving with inevitability. Guards stationed there drew swords and halberds, barring his path. "Halt!" one shouted, though his voice shook. "State your business." "My business is reclamation," Mordekaiser said, and raised his mace. The guard braced, but Mordekaiser swung with a speed belying his size. The halberd shattered. The guard flew backward, bones crunching. Another guard lunged with a spear. Mordekaiser caught the spear and snapped it, then lifted the guard effortlessly and hurled him into the gate, shattering it. He walked through. Panic erupted. Alarm bells tolled. Soldiers rushed to respond. They found themselves facing not a horde, but a single being whose armor deflected arrows and who shrugged off spears. When he swung his mace, men flew like rag dolls. When he uttered a word in Oknun, the souls of the fallen were ripped free, dragged screaming into the green glow of his armor. He did not waste energy on those who did not matter. He could have slaughtered them all, but his aim was not to depopulate Noxus. He had a relic to place, a connection to strengthen, and a fortress to reclaim. He moved inexorably toward the central courtyard where the old throne room once sat. The ground trembled. Every step he took reverberated through the stones. In the courtyard, a young woman wearing a crimson cloak stepped forward. She carried a whip of metal that sparked with electricity. "I am Rel, the Iron Maiden," she declared, voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I will not let you harm my people." Mordekaiser regarded her. In another time, in another life, he might have admired her mastery over metal and magnetism. He sensed the iron in her blood and the anger in her soul. "You have been forged by pain," he said. "I offer you freedom. Join me, and your chains will be repurposed." "I forge my own fate," Rel replied, swinging her whip. It wrapped around Mordekaiser's arm, crackling with energy. She tried to pull him, but he did not budge. He tugged the whip, yanking her off her feet. She landed hard but rolled, using her metal bending to twist the ground, forming spikes of iron to impale him. The spikes slammed into his armor and bent. He swung his mace, and she barely dodged. He brought nightfall down, cracking the cobblestones. Rel grimaced, straining every nerve. She was strong, but she was flesh. He was death. He could have killed her, but he recognized potential. With a word, he opened a portal beneath her feet, pulling her into the death realm. There, in a grey void, she faced him alone. He spoke to her as their weapons clashed, telling her of his plans, offering her a place in his ranks. She rejected him, her anger at the empire that had abused her too fresh, her morality not yet eroded. He knocked her down and placed nightfall at her throat. He could have ended her. Instead, he left her with a warning. "Your strength is wasted on them. When you tire of being a tool for others, find me." He released her back into the physical realm, leaving her gasping and shocked. He moved on. Within the central chamber, he located the place where the relic should be placed. Here, in a space between two columns of carved marble that depicted ancient battles, he could feel a faint echo of his afterworld. He lifted the pulsing relic from within his chest. It beat like a heart, thrumming with energy. He placed it into a carved recess in the floor. The ground swallowed it. Immediately, green light spread across the floor like veins. It traveled up the columns, across ceilings, under floors, through walls. The immortal bastion groaned as though alive. In Mitna Rachnun, the heart of the afterworld flared. The connection was complete. Across the city, people felt it. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by dread. Others clutched their chests as though something had brushed against their souls. In far corners of Runeterra, sensitive mages woke screaming. A new presence entered the world, vast and cold. The line between life and death grew thinner. From now on, when someone in Noxus died, their soul had a stronger chance of being pulled into Mordekaiser's realm instead of whatever afterlife awaited them. The Iron Revenant felt power flood into him. He lifted his mace and roared, a sound that shook the heavens. Jericho Swain watched from a balcony overlooking the courtyard, his expression grim. Darius stood beside him, fists clenched. "What are we to do?" Darius asked, always direct. "We adapt," Swain said. "We survive. We find his weaknesses. We cannot face him head on, not yet." Below, Mordekaiser marched through the bastion, claiming rooms and halls that had once been his. He absorbed the souls bound within the walls, strengthening himself. He did not bother to sit on a throne. He had more to do. He needed to test his new connection, refine his control of the boundary between worlds. He needed to gather more souls, extend his influence beyond Noxus. He needed to remind Runeterra who he was. Chapter 10. Battles across Runeterra. News of Mordekaiser's return spread like wildfire, carried on the tongues of merchants and the whispers of spies. In Demacia, high in the shining halls of the great city, King Jarvan heard reports of an iron giant laying waste to Noxus's soldiers and forging an alliance with death itself. Light mages studied ancient texts, searching for any mention of rituals to counter necromancy. The Demacian mage seekers, sworn to root out forbidden magic, discussed dispatching hunters to investigate. High Counselor Vesaria Heirloom, whose ancestor had once studied Noxian history, flipped through dusty volumes that mentioned San Uzal and the Iron Revenant. "We thought him a story," she murmured. In Ionia, the warring provinces remembered all too well the horrors Noxus had visited upon them, and many saw Mordekaiser's return as a chance for vengeance. They debated whether to send assassins to strike him in his own domain, or to let Noxus fight its own monster. A group of Jonin proposed sending the Kinku Order to investigate, believing that only those who walked between realms could deal with such a threat. Shen, the Eye of Twilight, listened gravely. He knew the balance of life and death was delicate. An entity that bound souls en masse threatened to tip that balance irreparably. He considered whether to request aid from the Spirit Blossom Festival's guardians. In the Freljord, seers cast bones and saw iron towers and green flames in their visions. They felt a cold wind blowing from the south. The Avarosan saw it as a warning, the winter's claw as a challenge. Sejuani pounded her fist on the table and vowed to smash this new tyrant. She consulted with Udir, the spirit walker who could sense changes in the spiritual realm. He told her that something unnatural had arisen, something that sought to consume all the spirits of the Freljord if allowed. They both knew they might have to put aside tribal conflicts to face a common enemy. In Shurima, Azir stood atop his golden spire, feeling the tremor through the earth that signaled a shift in the balance of souls. He looked east and thought of Sitaka and the Ascended who had fought a being similar in ambition ages ago. Natsus, the curator of the sands, remembered ancient wars against undead kings who would not die. He dusted off records that mentioned a barbarian warlord forging his own afterlife. His keen mind recognized the pattern. He traveled to the immortal bastion's ruins in Shurima, searching for clues. In the far west, Bilgewater's fortune-tellers saw a shadow crossing the waves, a towering armored figure dragging ships and crews into the depths. A few laughed, believing such tales impossible. Those who had seen the dead rise from the waters were not so quick to dismiss them. The bounty board offered a fortune for proof of Mordekaiser's demise, though none sought to claim it. Mordekaiser himself did not sit idle. Now anchored in the mortal realm, he sought to demonstrate his power, to draw souls, and to test his ability to drag entire groups into his death realm. He marched north from Noxus with a small retinue of living soldiers bound to his will, and a legion of spirits marching invisibly beside him. Villages along the way emptied at the mere sight of him. He passed through without slaughter. Dead souls were more valuable when taken from soldiers than peasants. He targeted a garrison of soldiers that had once belonged to the empire he destroyed centuries ago, now under new leadership. They were disciplined, armed with crossbows that fired bolts dipped in blessed silver. They believed faith would protect them. The battle began at dawn. Rows of crossbowmen stood atop earthen ramparts, aiming at the approaching iron giant. They loosed a volley. Bolts struck Mordekaiser's armor and clattered harmlessly to the ground. He raised his mace and pointed. A rift opened, an oval of swirling darkness. From within, spectral knights rode out, armor clanking, lances lowered. Their horses were fleshless, their eyes glowed green. They hit the rampart like a wave, knocking soldiers off their feet. Mordekaiser himself strode forward, absorbing bolts as though they were rain. He swung nightfall, each blow killing multiple men. Those he struck felt their souls rip free. He spoke, and the souls flew into his armor, feeding him. The commander of the garrison, a veteran with a scar across his face, realized that physical force might not suffice. He ordered his men to focus on the necromancer's robed figures chanting behind Mordekaiser. Arrows found their marks, dropping 2 necromancers. Souls erupted from their bodies, heading toward Mordekaiser. The commander prayed to whatever god he believed in and charged, his great sword raised. He swung at Mordekaiser's head. The Revenant parried easily, sparks flying. "You are brave," Mordekaiser said, almost sincerely. He grabbed the man by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "Your bravery will be rewarded." With that, he dragged the commander into the death realm. In that grey expanse, the commander stood alone with Mordekaiser. "Where is this?" he gasped, eyes wide as the mist swirled. Mordekaiser's voice echoed from all directions. "The realm I have forged. Here there is no escape. There is only me." The commander gritted his teeth and swung, but the blade passed harmlessly through. Mordekaiser was everywhere and nowhere. He struck from behind, sending the commander sprawling. "Fight," Mordekaiser commanded. "It will make your soul sweeter." They fought for what felt like hours. The commander's skill was admirable, but he was mortal and he tired. Mordekaiser did not. Finally, the Revenant crushed the man's skull. The commander's soul hovered, trembling. "Your bravery grants you a place in my hall," Mordekaiser said. He drew the soul into his gauntlet. Back in the physical realm, the commander's body collapsed. His soldiers faltered, seeing their leader fall. The battle ended with bodies strewn across the ramparts, souls siphoned into Mordekaiser's armor. He raised his mace, glowing brighter now with fresh energy. He left the garrison in ruins, but did not pursue the fleeing survivors. Let them carry tales. Let them spread fear. Fear was as valuable as blood. With each encounter, he honed his ability to open his realm. He learned how to pull multiple targets, how to hold them longer, how to make time dilate so he could extract information while mere moments passed outside. He dragged rogue mages, criminal warlords, and even beasts into his realm, studying how different souls reacted. Some broke quickly, others resisted, their wills strong. The strong he bound as lieutenants, the weak he shattered. He tested his powers in a different way when he encountered an Ionian monk meditating by a waterfall. The monk sensed his approach and opened his eyes, revealing calm pupils. "I have been expecting you," he said. His voice was serene. "You disturb the balance." "Balance is an illusion," Mordekaiser replied. "There is only power, and those too weak to seize it." The monk smiled sadly. "Even power must yield to harmony, lest the world tear itself apart." Mordekaiser swung. The monk sidestepped gracefully, palms pressing against the mace. With a burst of chi, he deflected the blow. The waterfall's spray glimmered in the sunlight. They exchanged blows, physical and philosophical. Each time Mordekaiser's mace met the monk's hands, there was a shock like thunder. The monk channeled spiritual energy, momentarily staggering the revenant. Mordekaiser realized that this soul was attuned to realms beyond the physical. It would be a worthy addition. He opened the death realm. The monk did not resist the pull. He stepped through as if entering a temple. Inside, he sat cross-legged and began to chant. Mordekaiser expected fear. Instead, the monk smiled, his spirit luminous. "All things end," he said. "Even you." Mordekaiser grew irritated and struck. The monk's soul shattered into 1,000 pieces of light, each drifting upward like fireflies, resisting absorption. For the first time, Mordekaiser felt a soul slip his grasp. He realized there were forces, faith, harmony that could shield souls from his dominion. He marked this knowledge and vowed to study it further. In Demaya, he fought a company of knights led by a young woman carrying a shining blade infused with magic. Luxana Crownguard, known as the Lady of Luminosity, confronted him in a narrow canyon. Light burst from her staff like a dawn, searing shadows. "Begone, Revenant," she cried, raising her staff. "Your darkness will not consume my people." Her light magic, drawn from celestial sources, burned where it touched him. He felt the sting, a reminder that there were magics other than death. He raised his mace, absorbing some of the light, twisting it into something else. He launched a bolt of necrotic energy. She deflected it with a barrier. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. They clashed, light against darkness, each testing the other. Mordekaiser respected her resilience. He promised himself to drag her into his realm eventually, but not now. He withdrew, allowing rumors of a necromancer deterred by Demasia's light to spread, drawing out those who might oppose him. Throughout these battles, he continued to build his legend. He began to speak to his enemies before killing them, telling them of his plans, sowing doubt about their gods and their afterlives. He promised those who served him a place of honor in his hall. Some accepted, others spat at his offer and died screaming. He learned to savor the moment a soul realized its fate, capturing that despair and adding it to his reservoir. He also learned when to leave survivors. Fear bred stories. Stories bred inevitability. Inevitability led to submission. He did not limit himself to open warfare. He sent envoys, spectral messengers into courts and councils, offering alliances. In Shurima, he appeared in the dreams of a minor warlord, promising him immortality if he swore fealty. The warlord awoke sweating, but swore. In Piltover, he whispered to a disgruntled Hextech engineer, urging him to build devices that could channel spiritual energy. In Zorn, he nudged a chem baron to experiment on souls. He was laying foundations everywhere, readying the world for a time when his realm would overlay all others. Opposition organized. Champions from across Runeterra convened to discuss strategies. At a secret meeting hosted by the Kinku, representatives from Demacia, Piltover, Zaun, Freljord, and Shurima debated. Garen and Lig spoke for Demacia. Shen represented Ionia. Ash and Sejuani set aside their differences to attend. Nasus came from Shurima. Echo sneaked in from Zaun, his curiosity piqued by the talk of realms and souls. Jaces came from Piltover, his hammer strapped to his back. They argued about whether to fight Mordekaiser openly, to attack his relic, to find ways to protect souls, or to seek allies among spirits. They shared what knowledge they had. Nasus spoke of binding rituals. Shen shared techniques to cleanse souls. Lux offered the use of light magic. Echo suggested time manipulation to undo his actions. Ashi and Sejuani agreed to send warriors. Sejuani, with typical bluntness, slammed her fist on the table. "We go to war," she declared. Not everyone agreed. Jace insisted on caution, fearful that attacking the immortal bastion might provoke Noxus. Shen warned that assaults on the Death Realm could have unforeseen consequences. Nasus suggested striking at Mordekaiser's generals instead. In the end, they reached a fragile consensus. They would assemble an alliance, gather knowledge, and prepare for a coordinated strike, but only when they were ready. Mordekaiser's strength lay not only in his necromancy, but in his patience. They needed to match his preparation with their own. They would train spirit healers, develop weapons infused with celestial energy, and test their methods on lesser necromancers. They would study Ochnun, even if it meant risking their own souls. Mordekaiser was aware of these meetings. Through his connection to the Death Realm and the souls he had claimed, he learned of their plans. He was not concerned. He welcomed opposition. Conflict produced souls. Souls fed his realm. Their fear would lead them to commit desperate acts, acts that would create more death. And he was still learning. Each opponent taught him something new. Each battle polished his understanding. He told his generals to watch, to report, to avoid unnecessary confrontation until his plans matured. He sent emissaries to potential allies, offering them a place in the world to come. Some responded eagerly, others recoiled. He kept note. Every soul would eventually belong to him, whether through service or conquest. Chapter 11. Long-term plans and the final reign. Mordekaiser understood that total dominion could not be achieved overnight. Even with an army of spirits and a realm forged from the dead, he needed to entrench his power in a way that could not be undone by a single battle. He had learned from his first empire and his second. Tyranny bred rebellion. Fear could unite enemies. Betrayal could sever anchors. He needed to approach this conquest differently. His long-term plan was multifaceted, intertwining war, diplomacy, manipulation, and arcane craftsmanship. First, he would solidify his hold on Noxus. The relic's placement ensured that many souls within the city would be drawn into his realm upon death. He began encouraging policies that fostered conflict. He whispered in the ears of petty nobles, urging them to challenge rivals. He manipulated food supplies so that scarcity provoked riots. Each death fed him. At the same time, he offered protection to those who pledged loyalty. He created an inner circle of living followers, humans and other beings who enjoyed privileges in exchange for facilitating his will. They acted as his hands and eyes in the mortal world. They recruited, spied, and enforced. They wore black iron sigils marking them as his. Fear of them kept the population obedient. Love of immortality kept his cult fervent. Second, he invested in knowledge. He continued to plunder libraries and laboratories, searching for more information on celestial magic, time manipulation, and spiritual protection. He sought to understand those magics that resisted necromancy. He dissected light spells, hextech devices, and spiritual practices. He captured beings of light and shadow basilisks that fed on emotions, demons that fed on secrets, and bound them, forcing them to share their lore. He learned that celestial beings like the aspect of Justice Kale could purify souls beyond his reach. He resolved to deal with them separately, either by avoiding them or by targeting their followers to weaken them. He discovered that some artifacts, like the crown of Shurima or the gems of the Targonians, carried protective properties. He began making plans to neutralize or corrupt them. Third, he sowed discord among those who might unite against him. In Demacia, he spread rumors that the light mages planned to turn on non-mages. He whispered into the dreams of Freljordian seers that the alliance with their southern neighbors would lead to betrayal. In Ionia, he stoked divisions between Kinku and Navori. In Shurima, he hinted at ancient feuds. Every alliance that frayed meant less unified opposition. He did the same within Noxus, ensuring that Swain had to focus on internal stability rather than dedicating all resources to stop him. He encouraged the Black Rose to plot against the Tripharics, the Crimson Circle to seek more power, and individual houses to pursue revenge. Each scheme he set into motion created ripples that spread chaos and produced death. Fourth, he focused on souls. Not just any souls, but specific ones. He wanted the souls of powerful warriors, brilliant strategists, master mages. He targeted them through war, assassination, or enticement. He dragged them into his realm and either broke them into raw energy or shaped them into lieutenants. He gave them positions of command over his spectral legions. He promised them leadership roles in the world to come. He took their knowledge and added it to his own. He was building not just an army, but an administration of the dead. He needed governors and architects, judges, and enforcers. In his vision, the living world would one day be managed by souls bound eternally to his will, each performing a function suited to its talents. Fifth, he planned to expand his death realm's reach. The relic in the immortal bastion was a bridge, but there could be others. He intended to plant similar relics in strategic locations across Runeterra, beneath Demacia's capital, under Shurima's ziggurats, deep within the frozen heart of the Freljord, and in hidden vaults in Zaun and Piltover. Each relic would strengthen his ability to pull souls from those regions, to manifest physically, and to overlay his realm onto theirs. He sent spectral scouts and living cultists to locate potential sites. Each relic would require preparation, infiltration, and, perhaps, war to install. He had time. He did not need all of them at once. He could take them one by one. Sixth, he turned his mind to the cosmos itself. The Tome of Spirits had hinted at realms beyond those of mortal death. The Shadow Isles, suffused with black mist, held a nexus of undeath. The void threatened to consume all. Targon's aspects watched from on high. Each represented both threat and opportunity. Mordekaiser contemplated whether he should ally with some, destroy others, or simply consume them. He decided to approach each in turn, learning, probing, and waiting for moments of weakness. He would not be like Viego, who let love and obsession undo him. He would not be like the ruined king, who lost everything chasing a single soul. Mordekaiser's ambition was broader. He sought not a person, but a state of existence, one where he controlled the cycle of life and death. Finally, he considered the metaphysical. He had created his afterworld, but could he merge it with reality permanently? Could he reshape the very fabric of Runeterra so that living and dead existed simultaneously, bound by his will? The relics were a step toward this, but he envisioned more. He imagined a ritual using the power of dragon lines, ley lines, the convergence of celestial bodies, and the sacrifice of millions of souls to overlay Midna Rashnun onto the physical realm. Mountains would become iron towers, rivers would flow with souls, the skies would darken with eternal twilight. This would be his final act, his magnum opus, the culmination of his long plan. He began drafting it in Oshnun, inscribing runes on scrolls made from the essence of stars. He hid these plans in the deepest vaults of his afterworld, guarded by spirits bound specifically to protect them. As he planned, he still walked the mortal world, harvesting souls, testing enemies, showing his power. He dragged champions into his realm not merely to kill them, but to study them. He told them of his vision, gauging their reactions. Some laughed, some begged, some cursed. None truly understood the scale of his ambition. Each returned, if he allowed them to return, with a piece of his narrative. He wanted the world to know enough to fear him, but not enough to counter him. He allowed false rumors to spread, that he could be undone by destroying his armor, that he feared silver, that the light could dissolve him. He reinforced some by feigning pain when hit with light spells. He hid others. He played games of perception while building reality. In his spare moments, he walked the halls of the immortal bastion, remembering his first life. He touched carvings of battles long past. He recalled faces of warriors who had stood beside him as San Uzal. He felt a pang of something almost like nostalgia, not for friendship or love, but for the purity of purpose he had felt. He allowed himself to remember the shamaness, old and frail, her eyes milky, singing his glories. He thought of his sister, long dead, whose champion he had slain to save her honor. These memories did not soften him, they hardened his resolve. He was all those lives and more now. He would not be undone by sentimentalism. He would use memory as fuel. His long reign stretched ahead of him like an iron road. He walked it unhurried, aware that even if it took centuries, he had centuries. Mortals would live and die, empires would rise and fall, and he would be there, constant as death itself. He saw himself standing on the highest tower of Midna Rashnun, looking down on a world forged in his image, where souls moved like currents in a river he directed. He smiled, though his face was hidden behind a helm. He whispered in Ochnun, a word that meant completion and inevitable triumph. He would make it so. Thus, the Iron Revenant story continued, entwined with the fates of champions and commoners, of kingdoms and tribes. His shadow fell long across Runeterra, a promise of the darkness to come. Those who fought him did so knowing they stood against an enemy who had conquered death. Those who served him did so with the hope of sharing in his twisted immortality. In the spaces between breaths and in the silence between heartbeats, souls felt his pull, and somewhere, in a grey fog beyond mortal understanding, The wheel of his iron will turned, grinding ever forward toward the day when life and death would be one under his reign. Chapter the 12. The Immortal Bastion's Secrets. The immortal bastion was more than stone and iron. It was the physical expression of San Uzal's will, raised atop the bones of those who had defied him. When construction began, he stood before the chosen site and drove his spear into the earth. Blood seeped up like oil from some ancient vein, and he knew it was the right place. He ordered thousands of captives to dig foundations deep enough to anchor a mountain. They carved through basalt and granite, unearthing fossils and forgotten relics. As the trenches reached depths where no light penetrated, he descended himself, pressing his bare hand to raw rock and whispering in Ochnun. The forbidden language resonated with the earth. Faint veins of pale light pulsed as if in answer. He understood that this place had always been a threshold between worlds. He intended to widen that threshold until it became a gate. The first stones were laid with ceremony. Each block bore runes etched by his own hand. Each held a soul warriors, seers, children spirits, stripped and ground and pressed into mortar. As walls rose, chants in Ochnun echoed across the plateau. The labourers toiled in silence, save for the rasp of stone and the crack of whips. At night, bonfires lit the growing skeleton of the bastion, casting shadows that seemed to dance of their own accord. San Uzal walked among the scaffolds, watching, correcting, replacing incompetent overseers with more capable ones. He was not merely building a fortress, he was constructing an instrument. Every tower, every corridor, every column would direct and amplify necromantic currents. He planned the layout like a war map, drawing lines of force and circles of containment. He inscribed spiral staircases with sutras that bound souls to his service. The very geometry served his magic. Later, necromancers would call it genius. He simply called it necessity. At the heart of the bastion, he created a chamber that had no doors. Its entrance could only be reached by those who spoke Ochnun and knew the hidden path. Within, he placed the first anchor. It was a ring of iron the size of a wagon wheel, forged from ore mined with the bones of his enemies. He heated the iron until it glowed white, then cooled it with the lifeblood of 100 prisoners, binding their spirits to the metal. He inscribed the ring with 401 runes, no more, no less, each representing a principle of binding. He spoke the words of Ochnun that named him not as San Uzal, but as something beyond. The ring pulsed, resonating with his soul. He felt a tug, a tether forming between his essence and the mortal plane. He smiled behind his helm, though in those days he still wore no helm. He instructed his sorcerers to weave spells around the anchor, to conceal it from all but those he chose. He created decoys and traps, false anchors that would explode in necrotic fury if tampered with. He planned for treachery even then. His inner circle during those years was composed of more than brute warriors. He gathered scholars, artisans, and mages from across the conquered lands. Among them was a gaunt woman who spoke with a hissing accent and wore a cloak of pale feathers. She called herself a chronicler, but her eyes missed nothing, and her smile never reached them. Unknown to him then, she would later be known as the Pale Woman. He tolerated her presence because her mind was keen and her knowledge of forgotten magics vast. She often disappeared into shadows only to emerge with scrolls detailing rituals lost to time. She never challenged him directly. Instead, she asked questions that sharpened his thinking. When he spoke in Oknun, she listened too intently. He suspected she had motives beyond service, but he also suspected he could turn those motives to his benefit. There were others. A hulking blacksmith from the far west with arms like tree trunks who forged iron as if it were clay. An emaciated scribe from the east who wrote every word spoken in the bastion. A former shamaness who had abandoned her tribe to learn new power. They formed the nucleus of his sorcerer kings, individuals who commanded not armies but knowledge. He set them to tasks. The blacksmith labored under his watch to create Nightfall, his mace, from a meteorite that had fallen during a blood moon. They heated the metal in a pit stoked by souls. Each blow of the hammer rang like a bell. Each strike drove spirits deeper into the alloy. San Usal himself tempered the weapon, quenching it in the essence of a slain dragon. When it emerged, it pulsed with the glow of necromancy. He christened it Nightfall because when it struck, the light left his enemy's eyes. The scribe built a library within the bastion, a vault of knowledge where volumes seized from across the wild lands were catalogued. He devised ciphers to record Oknun without revealing its secrets. He and the pale woman argued over lexicons late into the night. The shamaness, once a mouthpiece of gods, now served him. She developed rites that allowed them to strip souls more efficiently. She tested incantations on prisoners, pulling spirits from bodies like threads from cloth. San Uzal watched each experiment, his curiosity unhidden. When something failed, he noted the error and punished the responsible parties with swift executions. When something succeeded, he rewarded with survival and a share in his vision. Through this ruthless scholarship, necromancy evolved from superstition into science. They discovered that souls had flavors, anger, sorrow, longing, and that these could be used to empower different spells. They learned to shape souls into constructs, into weapons, into walls. Though he valued his sorcerers, he never trusted them entirely. He had been betrayed in life and expected betrayal in death. To that end, he maintained control over the key components of the bastion. He alone knew all the hidden passages. He alone knew all the true anchors. He kept the final verses of Oknun to himself. When he taught his followers, he withheld a word here, a symbol there. He liked to remind them that their power flowed from him. This fostered resentment, but it also ensured they could never overtake him. He allowed them to think they might one day discover the missing pieces. The pale woman's eyes glittered whenever he spoke, as if cataloguing every omission. He let her. Part of his plan was to see how far ambition would push those around him. By observing traitors, he could better understand betrayal. The bastion grew. Its outer walls rose high enough to scrape the sky. Its inner courtyards housed barracks, forges, training yards, sacrificial altars. Statues of iron and bone depicted victorious battles and vanquished gods. In the throne hall, a cavernous space, supported by pillars carved with crying faces, he placed his seat, a block of black stone that seemed to devour light. He seldom sat on it. Thrones were, to him, symbols of stagnation. He preferred to stand, to pace, to loom, yet he built the throne to satisfy the expectations of mortals. It anchored the idea of sovereignty. Above it, on the ceiling, he commissioned a mural of a sun, darkening as it was eclipsed by a disk of iron. Those who entered the hall felt as if time slowed. Their footfalls echoed and re-echoed. He designed it that way. It was not just a room. It was a ritual space. Here he could convene his inner circle, recite spells in Ochnen, and amplify his voice across the bastion. In quiet moments, he descended to the hidden chamber with the anchor. There, he would press his hand against the iron ring and feel the hum of connection. He would speak to the souls bound within his armor, instructing them to watch over the bastion. He would listen for whispers from beyond, hints of threats or possibilities. He also contemplated his own mortality. Even at the height of his first empire, he knew he would die again. Death, he realized, was not an end, but a doorway to power. He planned accordingly. In the chamber, he drafted contingencies. He wrote spells to transfer his consciousness. He carved runes on his breastplate that would allow him to rebuild his body. He created codes to be enacted by his sorcerers should he fall. He even considered allowing the bastion to be overrun to test the worthiness of those who would claim it. Everything in the bastion was a trap as much as it was a treasure. It was a reflection of his mind, labyrinthine, layered, dangerous. Chapter 13. The Betrayer's Eyes. He called himself Velkan when he was still a boy, long before he betrayed the only ruler he had ever known. The name meant wolf in an old dialect of the northern wildlands. He had been born in a village that existed in the shadow of San Uzal's conquests. As a child, he had watched his father and uncles march off to fight the ironclad warlord, only to return on pikes as a warning. He had wept when the conqueror's men took his sister to serve as a cook in the bastion. He had vowed revenge, but hunger has a way of bending oaths. When San Uzal offered the remnants of the village a choice starve in rebellion or live in service, Velkan's mother chose life. Velkan entered the bastion not as a prisoner, but as an apprentice blacksmith, his broad hands suited to hammer and tongs. Years passed. He grew into his muscles. He swung hammers until his shoulders ached, forging spearheads and nails, links of chain and plates of armor. He learned to shape metal as if shaping fate. He also learned to listen. He overheard whispers among the sorcerer kings. He heard words like Ochnen and Anchor. He glimpsed dark rituals from behind slits in iron doors. At first, he was filled with awe. San Uzal Mordekaiser, as he now called himself, was not just a warlord. He was a god made iron. When he walked past, the weight of his presence pressed on Velkan's chest like armor. The young smith believed that perhaps this god would bring order to a world that had always been chaos. He began to admire him. Admiration curdled into fear as he saw the price. He saw children dragged to altars and their souls siphoned. He saw old men worked to death building spires. He found his sister in a hallway, her eyes glazed, her spirit already half devoured by the runes carved into the walls. He tried to speak to her. She did not recognize him. He went to his masters, demanding mercy. The blacksmith who had mentored him slapped him across the face. "We serve or we die," the man hissed. "Do not speak of mercy here." Velkan bit his tongue. He swallowed his rage and returned to his forge. But inside, something shifted. He began to watch more closely. He memorized the paths of the sorcerers. He studied the layout of the bastion. He collected rumors like nails, storing them for the day he would build something from them. The pale woman visited the forge one evening. She trailed her fingers along a row of freshly made blades as if choosing fruit. She stopped in front of Velkan and smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You are wasted on horseshoes," she said in a voice like silk. Your hands deserve a greater task." He did not respond. She leaned closer. "There are those who whisper that the Iron King can be unmade. Their whispers are in Oshnun. Their knives are ready. They need a smith who knows iron and knows the bastion. They need someone whose hatred burns hotter than the forge." Velkan's heart thudded. He did not trust this woman, this pale serpent who seemed to slither through walls. But he saw his sister's hollow eyes. He saw his village on pikes. He nodded once. "Tell me," he said. She told him little. She spoke of an alliance of Noxie tribes, of a cabal of mages, of a plan to sever the anchors that bound Mordekaiser's soul. She promised him freedom for his people and safety for his sister. She promised nothing for him. He asked, "What of me?" She replied, "If you succeed, you will have done something no one else has. If you fail, you will be dead. Does it matter?" He laughed then, a harsh bark. Death would be a mercy compared to this. He agreed. For months he played a double role. By day he hammered iron under Mordekaiser's gaze. He forged hinges and buckles for armor that would soon march across the world. He kept his eyes down, his back bent. By night he crept through secret corridors, mapping the bastion. He memorized the pattern of footsteps of the guards. He listened at the doors to the chamber with no entrance, hearing faint hums of power. He smuggled tiny knives to co-conspirators concealed among servants. He met with outlanders in cellars, their faces painted to hide their features. They spoke of the moment when the Noxie would storm the gates. Velkan would lead a small group into the heart of the bastion to destroy the anchor. The night came like a storm. Velkan woke to the blast of horns. Flames licked the sky as rebels lit pyres against the walls. Chaos erupted. He grabbed the tools he had hidden, a crowbar, a hammer, a set of chisels, and raced toward the hidden chamber. He led 5 others. His mentor, the shamaness's assistant, 2 warriors from his village, and a pale acolyte whose eyes glowed faintly. They spoke the words the pale woman had taught them. The wall shimmered and allowed them passage. Inside, the air hummed like a hive. The Xun ring sat upon a stone pedestal, runes glowing faintly. Velkan felt his soul tug toward it. He saw the faces of the prisoners bound within its circumference, their mouths open in silent screams. He raised his hammer. "For my sister," he whispered, and brought the hammer down. The sound was like 1,000 bells. The anchor cracked, arcs of necromantic energy leaping like lightning. The others swung chisels, prying at runes. The iron resisted. Velkan swung again, his arm shaking. The ring shuddered. He felt a presence turn its attention upon him. Mordekaiser's voice boomed from nowhere and everywhere. "Treacherous worm," it roared, "you think to sever me?" The chamber shook. Walls wept blood. Velkan gritted his teeth and struck again. The ring split. A wail rose from the souls within. White light burst from the breach, scorching his skin. He screamed, but did not stop. Around him, his companions were flung like rag dolls, their bodies hitting walls with sickening crunches. He could taste iron and smoke. He thought of his sister and kept pounding. The ring shattered. The hum cut off. A deep silence fell. Velkan slumped, his hands blistered, breath ragged. He looked up and saw Mordekaiser's silhouette in the doorway that was not there. The Revenant's eyes blazed. For a moment, Velkan saw not the god of iron, but the man San Uzal. He saw a flicker of respect, amusement, rage. Then Mordekaiser raised Nightfall. "You have served your purpose," he said. He brought the mace down. Velkan's skull cracked like a melon. The world went black. He felt himself falling, not to the floor, but through layers of reality. He tumbled through grey fog. He heard voices screaming, laughing, whispering. He felt hands reaching for him. He realized, too late, that there had been no mercy. The pale woman had lied. His sister was dead. His people were enslaved. His sacrifice had delayed Mordekaiser, but had not undone him. Yet, in his final heartbeat, Velkan smiled. He had struck a blow. He had been a hammer, and that was enough. Chapter 14. Chains of Servitude. Inside the armor of Mordekaiser, souls clung like barnacles to the hull of a ship. They whispered, moaned, argued, and sometimes sang. They had not chosen this fate. They had been ripped from bodies on battlefields, in alleys, in tents. Some had been warriors. Others had been healers, thieves, farmers, poets. Now they existed as flickers of consciousness bound to iron plates and leather straps, to chainmail links and helmet rivets. They were the voices in the hum that surrounded the Revenant as he walked. They were the glow in Nightfall's core. They were the heat that animated his limbs. Each had a story. Each was now part of his. A Demartian knight named Sir Alistair had once knelt before the light of the winged protector and sworn to defend his king. He had died on a distant road, his sword raised against the dark figure on a ghostly horse. He had felt his soul tugged like wool from a spindle, and then nothingness. Now his awareness flared whenever iron met bone. He saw through the slits of Mordekaiser's helm, but the world was hazy, as if seen through oil. He screamed curses that no one heard. He prayed to his god, but there was no answer. In his quiet moments, he spoke to the soul next to him, a child from the far south who giggled and asked what a night was. He told her stories to keep himself sane. A Freljordian shaman named Sikren had danced beneath northern lights. She had communed with spirits of ice and wind. When the Iron Revenant had swept through her village, she had stood on a hill and raised her staff, calling upon the bear spirit. The bear had roared, the sky had split, and then a mace had crushed her chest. Now she felt iron instead of fur. She felt heat instead of cold. She whispered to the spirits bound with her. She tried to teach them how to dream of snow. Sometimes, when Mordekaiser passed through a blizzard, she thought she felt her old powers stir. She would send out a tendril of thought, trying to freeze the iron from within. Each time, Mordekaiser tightened his grip, squeezing her essence until she whimpered. "Do not attempt that," his inner voice warned. "You are mine." A Zornite chem baron, known only as Twitch to his associates, had experimented on the souls of lab rats and urchins. He had believed himself untouchable, hidden in his glass tower. When Mordekaiser had dragged him into the death realm, he had tried to barter knowledge for freedom. "I can help you harvest souls more efficiently," he had pleaded. Mordekaiser had laughed. "I already know more than you," he had replied. He had crushed Twitch's skull and bound him into a greave. Now Twitch tasted metal and regret. He could still analyze things. He calculated the angles of each swing, the force of each step. He offered suggestions. "If you pivot here, you'll generate more torque," he would say into the void. Sometimes Mordekaiser listened. More often he did not. The Chem Baron learned that in death as in life, knowledge without power was nothing. These souls were not alone. The armor contained hundreds, perhaps thousands. They were woven through the chain links and braided into leather. They formed a choir when Mordekaiser spoke in Ochnun, their voices adding depth to his chants. They were reservoirs of energy he could draw upon when casting spells. He treated them like resources, but he also understood their value. He occasionally addressed them, reminding them of his promise. "Serve me well," he would say within the privacy of his iron skin, "and when I reshape the world, you will have a place within it. Resist me, and you will become mortar." Some resisted anyway. They tried to coordinate, to pull energy away, to disrupt his spells. He felt their efforts as tiny tugs. He crushed them as one might crush gnats. Yet, in strange moments, he conversed. He interrogated the knight about Dalmatian tactics, the shaman about Froljordian rites, the chem baron about hextech. He gleaned information. He compared it with his own knowledge. He planned accordingly. In his loneliness, he sometimes told them stories of his first life. He recounted battles, described landscapes long turned to dust. The souls listened, whether out of fear or fascination. A child from Ionia once asked him timidly, "Do you miss anyone?" There was a long pause. Then Mordekaiser answered, "No, I burned such weakness from myself long ago." The child responded, "I miss my cat." Mordekaiser said nothing. He resumed walking. The souls pondered the silence. When he forged new armor, he wove souls into it deliberately. He selected personalities suited to the function. He bound a strategist to his helm so he could anticipate ambushes. He bound a singer to his breastplate so chants flowed more smoothly. He bound a spy to his belt so secrets would be whispered into his ear. He began to view the souls as a choir he conducted. He arranged them to harmonize, to produce power. He discovered that when souls with complementary emotions were placed adjacent, rage next to sorrow, hope next to despair, the resonance increased his spell's potency. He used this to devastating effect. Nightfall's glow became brighter, its impact heavier. His death realm responded more quickly. He was not a kind master, but he was an attentive one. He shaped his collection of souls like an artist shapes clay. For the souls, existence was pain and dullness punctuated by brief moments of vivid terror or joy. When he fought, they felt adrenaline as if they still had bodies. When he laughed, they felt vibration. When he rested, they drifted, dreaming of lives lost. Occasionally, one would fade entirely, its will eroded until it became raw essence. He would absorb it without ceremony. Occasionally, one would grow in strength, becoming a voice he could not ignore. These he sometimes promoted, granting them a measure of autonomy. He would allow them to inhabit a spectral form, to lead lesser spirits in his realm. Rare, but possible. It kept them obedient. Hope, he knew, was as useful a chain as fear. Chapter 15. Roses and Blood. The cliffs above the eastern sea were stained red with the blood of children when she found him. He sat on a throne carved from driftwood and bone, his eyes glowing like rubies, his tongue licking blood from his lips. He was no king, not yet, but a monster who had learned to feed on life. He had been named Mikhail once, a boy taken by an abusive tutor to the dark forests north of the capital. He had escaped by draining the man dry, discovering in that moment the joy and power of drinking life. He wandered, feeding, always moving to avoid torches and pitchforks. He had not yet met anyone who understood what he was becoming. Then the woman arrived, pale as moonlight, draped in a cloak that shimmered like cobwebs. "You are messy," she remarked, stepping over a rivulet of blood. Her voice was amused rather than disgusted. He hissed at her, baring fangs. "Stay back," he warned. "I will drain you." She laughed, the sound like chimes. "Will you? Do you know who I am?" He did not. He lunged. She raised a hand. Chains of light wrapped around his limbs, pinning him. He struggled, snarled, cursed. She approached, unconcerned. "My name is not important," she said. "Call me a friend. I have seen your kind before, Mikhail. I have seen what you can become if nurtured. Would you like to become more than a beast?" He stilled. "I am not a beast," he spat. "I am a god of blood." She shook her head. "You are a child with a knife. Let me show you true hemomancy." She flicked her wrist. The chains vanished. He rubbed his wrists wary. "Why would you help me?" he asked. She smiled. "Because you will owe me. Because I need someone to stand against a man made of iron. Because all empires fall, and when they do, those who know secrets inherit the ruins." She told him of Mordekaiser's reign, of the dark fortress rising inland, of souls siphoned, of anchors and necromancy. She told him of a cabal of sorcerers who opposed the Iron King, who called themselves the Black Rose. She was one of them, though she did not name it. She explained that Mordekaiser's magic was built on death, on the tearing of souls. Hemomancy, by contrast, was built on blood, on the fuel of life. "If we combine them," she mused, "we can create something that even he cannot comprehend." He listened, intrigued despite himself. She taught him words in a language older than his hunger. He tasted power in them. They practiced on condemned criminals captured from coastal villages. She showed him how to open veins without killing, how to draw blood into patterns, how to weave life force into spells. She demonstrated how to form tendrils that could manipulate objects, how to coagulate blood into weapons. He drank, but he also learned to savor. He began to call himself Vladimir. The name felt like velvet on his tongue. He watched the pale woman. She eventually revealed that she preferred to be called LeBlanc Slip between identities. She could be a beggar, a noble woman, a soldier. She could be in the bastion one day, on the cliffs the next. She whispered with the voice of Mordekaiser's generals and his servants. She wove deception like a tapestry. He absorbed her lessons. He realized that power was not only about strength, it was about perception, control, misdirection. Together, they cultivated a network of followers. They recruited priests disillusioned with their gods, nobles hungry for immortality, warriors eager for forbidden strength. They called their growing group the Black Rose. The name came from the vines that crawled up the bastion's walls, vines that bloomed into roses as black as midnight. LeBlanc plucked one and pricked her finger. "Beauty with thorns," she said. Vladimir pressed the bloom to his lips. It tasted like iron and perfume. Mordekaiser's reign provided them cover. While his armies marched, while his sorcerers erected altars, while his subjects trembled, the Black Rose learned. They stole tomes from the Bastion's library, copied rituals, twisted necromancy into hemomancy. They experimented, sometimes creating abominations that had to be burned. They delved into old records that spoke of the Darkin warriors from a bygone age whose souls had been bound to weapons and the secrets hidden beneath the immortal bastion. They learned that deep below, in caverns sealed by Oshnun, there lay a shard of a weapon used to fell a Darkin. They desired it. They sent agents to retrieve it. Most did not return. Those who did spoke of shadows that whispered of iron kings and halls made of bones. LeBlanc smiled. "It is good to know one's enemy," she said. "Better still to know what he guards." Vladimir, meanwhile, refined his art. He learned to stretch his lifespan by stealing years from others. He practiced on soldiers. He walked through camps, brushing arms, pulling months, years, decades, leaving men inexplicably aged. He discovered that blood carried memories. When he drank, he saw flashes of another's life. He saw the wildlands before they were conquered, the construction of the bastion, the faces of those long dead. In one vision, he saw San Uzal as a young man standing on a hill, surveying a battle. He felt the iron will emanating from him. He shivered. LeBlanc cautioned him. "Do not let his memories become your own," she warned. "You are not a vessel for his story. You are writing your own." He nodded, though sometimes he wondered if all stories were not connected. He accompanied LeBlanc into the bastion in disguise more than once. He felt the oppressive weight of the place. He heard the hum of souls in the walls. He sensed the ring anchor in the hidden chamber thrumming. He wondered what it would feel like to drink such a concentrated mass of life. LeBlanc slapped his hand away when he reached toward it. "Not yet," she chided. "We need him distracted. There will come a time." That time came when Velkan and his conspirators shattered the anchor. Chaos erupted. Mordekaiser's attention was drawn inward. The Noxi stormed the gates. In the confusion, LeBlanc and Vladimir slipped into an unguarded vault. They found the shard, a piece of dark metal that pulsed like a heartbeat. Vladimir touched it. Blood raced through his veins. He saw visions of a cataclysmic war, of beings of pure energy bound to weapons, of mortal mages who had dared to imprison gods. He recoiled. LeBlanc snatched the shard. "We take this and we leave," she said. "He will not miss it now. We will need it in centuries to come." He followed her, clutching his cloak. Behind them, the bastion shook as Mordekaiser's rage echoed through its stones. They emerged into the night. The black rose melted back into the shadows. Mordekaiser's second death came soon after. Vladimir watched from afar as the Iron King was dragged screaming back into the grey wasteland. He felt a pang of pity, which surprised him. "It hurts to be hungry," he thought. Then he shook his head. Pity was for fools. He had survived. He had new power. He had a place in the world to come. He turned to LeBlanc. "What now?" he asked. She smiled. "We wait. Empires rise, empires fall, roses bloom, roses die. But we endure." Chapter 16. Epilogue on the brink of convergence. Centuries later, the world had changed. Shurima rose and fell and rose again. Demacia built high walls of patricite to ward against magic. Piltover's spires pierced the clouds. Zorn grew beneath in toxic shadow. Ionia healed and bled, healed and bled. The Freljord remained frozen. Targon reached toward the stars. Yet, through all these cycles, a name persisted in whispers. Mordekaiser. Children invoked it to scare each other. Scholars debated whether he had been a man or a myth. The Black Rose kept dossiers on his every rumored appearance. The Kinku developed techniques to shield souls from necromancers. The Sentinels of Light patrolled the Shadow Isles, dealing with other undead threats. For many, the Iron Revenant was a cautionary tale, a monster of the past. For a few, he was an impending return. Deep within Mitna Raknun, the Iron Realm built from souls, Mordekaiser walked among his towers. He had abandoned the throne he had once forged. Thrones were for those encumbered by flesh. Instead, he moved, always moved, directing the endless labor of spirits. Spires rose and fell at his command. Rivers of souls flowed according to his design. He watched them, adjusting their currents to produce harmonies. He spoke in Oshnun, not for others, but for himself, practicing the cadence of the final ritual. He could feel the pull of the relic in the immortal bastion. It vibrated like a plucked string. It was ready. Only a few more strokes, a few more sacrifices, and the gap between his realm and the living world would widen irrevocably. On Runeterra, preparations stirred. In a hidden temple in Ionia, Shen meditated before a pool of still water. He saw flickers of iron towers reflected in the depths. He dipped his fingers into the pool, creating ripples. "He is restless," he murmured. In Demacia, Lux read a book bound in pale leather. She traced diagrams of wards and runes, memorizing the shapes that could sever necromantic anchors. She whispered to her brother Garen, who listened with arms crossed, brow furrowed. "We must trust mages for this," she implored. He grunted, torn between duty and prejudice. In Piltover, Jace hammered a device that hummed with arcane energy. He consulted with a woman named Oriana, who spoke in precise mechanical tones about calibrating for spectral frequencies. In Zorn, Echo adjusted a dial on his Z-drive, pondering whether he could rewind time in the moment a soul was taken. "It would be risky," he muttered, "but maybe worth it." Across the sea, on the Shadow Isles, Senna and Lucian trained new sentinels. They fired relic pistols at wraiths that oozed from black mist. Senna's eyes glowed with light and darkness intertwined. She thought of her own soul, once trapped, now free. She vowed never to let anyone suffer what she had. When a young sentinel asked about Mordekaiser, she shuddered. "He is not like the ruined king," she said. "He does not love. He only conquers. Remember that." In the Freljord, Sejuani cracked ice with her flail training warriors. She spoke of forging alliances with unnatural beings if it meant survival. Ash listened, shaking her head. "We must not bargain with death," she whispered. "In Targon, the aspects conferred. Pantheon, vessel of the aspect of war, grunted. 'I will fight him if he climbs the mountain,' he said. Soraka, the Star Child, frowned, hearing the suffering of souls bound unwillingly. "There must be a way to heal them," she whispered. Zoe giggled and somersaulted. "Ooh, a new playmate," she sang, though her eyes flickered with ancient knowing. The Black Rose watched from shadows. LeBlanc sat in a chair carved from a single piece of crimson wood, swirling wine in a glass. "Our old friend stirs," she said to a hooded figure across from her. Vladimir emerged from the gloom, his hair still red despite centuries. "Do we help or hinder?" he asked. She shrugged. "Both, perhaps. He is a threat to our autonomy, but also an opportunity. The world will be distracted. Secrets will surface. We thrive in chaos." She lifted her glass. "To chaos." He raised his own, filled with blood. "To survival." They drank. Mordekaiser turned his gaze toward the mortal realm. Through the relic, he sensed souls like stars, each a point of light. He focused on those that burned brightest, the champions, the leaders, the stubborn. He would need their souls for his ritual. He began to speak their names in Ochnun, weaving them into his plan. He reached out, tugging gently. In dreams, they felt a chill. In the corners of their eyes, they saw iron. He smiled. "Soon," he whispered, "soon you will all see my world." He summoned his generals, spirits he had bound to his service since his return. They assembled in the great hall of Mitna Rashnun, the silent judge with scales balanced with souls. The horned queen who had once ruled a mountain kingdom. the faceless assassin who moved like smoke, the scholar who carried an entire library in his memory. He addressed them without preamble. "The time approaches," he said. "The relic sings. The world is ignorant. Our forces are strong. Each of you will lead an incursion into a different region. You will plant anchors, create chaos, harvest souls. Do not overreach. Draw them out. Test their defenses. We will not yet reveal the full scope. We will probe." They nodded. No one questioned. He dismissed them and returned to his tower. He looked out at his realm. Tower after tower, river after river, souls flowing like water. He thought of the grey wasteland he had first woken in. He thought of the nothingness that had greeted him. He had transformed nothing into something. He had forged his own afterlife. He had shaped it into an empire. Soon he would not have to travel between realms. He would bring his realm to them. The thought filled him with anticipation akin to joy. He raised nightfall. The mace thrummed. Souls within it sang. He began to speak, reciting the first lines of the final spell. His voice rolled across Midna Rachnan, across the relic, across the thin veil. In the living world, a wind rose cold and metallic. Dogs howled, children shivered, warriors tightened grips on weapons, mages felt pressure behind their eyes. The world held its breath. The Iron Revenant stepped forward. His footsteps echoed in the realm of death and, faintly, in the realm of the living. "I have conquered life," he said. "I have conquered death. Now I will conquer the space between. Behold the dawn of my final reign."